In the hushed heart of Rome, where ancient cobblestones trace paths toward the very seat of Christendom, a profound and enduring question has long echoed, older even than the resonant tolling of St. Peter's bells. It concerns a power rumored to operate not in the radiant light of papal white, but from the depths of shadow. Whispers persist of a figure whose vestments are as dark as the deepest night, a presence whose authority is said to permeate even the most fortified chambers and dimly lit corridors. While the world reveres the Pope as the vicar of Christ, enthroned in splendor and surrounded by solemn ceremony, a centuries-old query continues to surface. Could another individual, rarely seen and unnamed in the bustling streets, wield influence equal to or even surpassing that of the pontiff? This enigmatic figure is often referred to as the Black Pope, a title born not of derision, but from the somber hue of his official attire, the superior general of the Society of Jesus, the formidable Jesuits. Indeed, the very fabric of the eternal city seems to guard this secret. Rome, after all, harbors its ancient mysteries with the same ease it cradles its magnificent ruins. By day, golden sunlight bathes its fountains and piazzas, drawing visitors like moths to a marble glow. But as dusk descends, an entirely different city emerges, where shadows stretch long and ominous across monumental domes. In the labyrinthine alleys that coil behind the majestic Vatican walls, one might almost perceive the faint rustle of heavy robes, the subtle scrape of boots upon ancient stone, and the low murmur of voices that deliberately avoid the revealing light. It is within these secluded, often overlooked residences of Jesuit generals that pivotal decisions are said to have been quietly deliberated, choices with the potential to reshape kingdoms, to sway the course of nations. Here, without the outward trappings of a throne or a crown, a command could be issued that would ripple outward, mobilizing armies, silencing dissent, and subtly redirecting the very flow of human history. The Black Pope, unlike his counterpart in white, does not grace balconies with his presence, or raise chalices in the expansive grandeur of St. Peter's Square. His movements are cloaked in an almost monastic silence, his power derived from binding men with vows of obedience more immutable and enduring than any carved marble. This very concept of a hidden authority has historically disquieted both monarchs and cardinals. For if the Pope in white served as the visible shepherd of the faithful, then what role did this other Pope, shrouded in black, truly play? To some, he was perceived as the Church's most astute strategist, its unwavering and most loyal sword. To others, he represented a potential rival, a silent, formidable threat, an emperor reigning from the shadows. Thus, the legend gained momentum and breadth. Was the Black Pope genuinely the most powerful man within the city of Rome? Could his pronouncements carry more weight than even a papal decree? Or was this evocative title merely a rumor, amplified and distorted over centuries by a potent blend of fear and profound fascination? As the evening bells gently toll across the sprawling city, each note unfurling like a wave through the ancient streets, they serve as a melodic reminder of Rome's enduring grandeur. Yet, beneath this visible splendor, an undercurrent of something darker, more profound, persists, a current inextricably linked to a name whispered with an equal measure of reverence and deep-seated dread. The genesis of this formidable power, surprisingly, does not lie within opulent marble palaces, but in the stark confines of a cave, where a broken soldier once knelt in profound silence. It begins with a singular vision, one that would ultimately give birth to an army unlike any the world had ever known. However, before embarking on that journey to the cave, before witnessing the very dawn of the Jesuits, let us linger for a fleeting moment longer within Rome itself. Picture standing before the monumental dome of St. Peter's as dusk deepens its embrace, the sky above bruising into rich shades of purple and black. Pilgrims, their faces etched with devotion, fall into quiet prayer, their flickering candles resembling fragile, earthbound stars. And there, beyond their solemn vigil, hidden within the labyrinthine halls where no ordinary pilgrim ever treads, a man in a black robe walks with slow, deliberate steps. His footsteps resonate softly off the polished stone, a sound both hushed and definitive, much like the turning of a momentous page. The air itself feels ancient and heavy, imbued with the weight of centuries, and in that ambiguous space, suspended between unwavering faith and formidable power, between the overtly seen and the subtly unseen, the enduring shadow of the Black Pope continues to linger. As night finally draws its complete veil across Rome, the fundamental questions persist. Who truly holds the ultimate keys to power within this ancient city? Whose hand subtly maneuvers, unseen, across the grand chessboard of history? And how, from a soldier's simple vow, uttered in moments of excruciating pain and utter solitude, did a power emerge so vast that it would challenge kings and unsettle even popes? The profound answer to these inquiries lies just ahead, patiently waiting in silence. The hour grows late, the city's myriad sounds gradually quiet, and the shadows deepen further. One must follow the imagined sound of footsteps through the winding, secretive alleys of Rome, until the familiar stone pathways finally give way to the profound solitude of a cave, and the true narrative of this extraordinary power finally begins. This story commences not with the pomp of crowns, nor with the authority of papal decrees, but with the unexpected, life-altering fall of a soldier. Ignatius of Loyola was once the very embodiment of steel and unbridled fire, a proud Spanish knight who carried the swagger of nobility and the unyielding pride of a seasoned warrior. His soul yearned for the exhilarating clash of battle, the profound honor of duels, and the glorious spoils of conquest. But then, a fateful day arrived on the formidable walls of Pamplona, when all of his worldly aspirations were irrevocably shattered. A cannonball, a brutal instrument of war, tore through both stone and bone with devastating force, utterly shattering his leg and leaving him writhing in unimaginable agony beneath the deafening roar of battle. The once towering soldier now lay broken, his once feared sword reduced to a mere memory, no longer a weapon to wield. His subsequent recovery was a protracted and cruel ordeal, punctuated by long stretches of agonizing silence. Confined within the walls of his family's ancestral castle, his proud and restless spirit chafed desperately against the suffocating weight of helplessness. He pleaded for the thrilling, romantic tales of chivalric knights and courtly romances to soothe his agitated mind. Instead, the only books available within his reach were the lives of saints, weighty tomes filled with accounts of divine visions, arduous penances, and the compelling narratives of men and women who had surrendered everything for their faith. Initially, he resisted these unexpected narratives, his heart still clinging stubbornly to the lingering echoes of swordplay. Yet, Slowly, inexorably, the profound words within those pages began to penetrate his very being in ways that no steel blade ever could. The once restless knight began to envision a completely different kind of battlefield, the intricate and profound arena of the soul. Months later, still limping and bearing the indelible scars of his ordeal, he embarked on a solitary pilgrimage, deliberately abandoning all courtly ambition for the uncertain, divinely guided path of God. His journey ultimately led him to the small, unassuming Catalonian town of Manresa. There, on the tranquil banks of the river Cardner, stood a cave, dark, initially unwelcoming, yet possessing a profound silence deep enough for a man to truly hear the subtle whispers of eternity. Ignatius entered that cave not as a proud knight, nor as a noble of high birth, but as a pilgrim stripped bare of all worldly pretense. Days seamlessly stretched into weeks, and weeks into arduous months. He fasted relentlessly until his body trembled with weakness, and he scourged himself until the raw lines of pain were visibly etched upon his skin. By the flickering, solitary light of a candle, he wept tears of spiritual anguish. He prayed with an intensity he had never known. He wrestled with inner demons, both tangible and imagined. His mind, once honed for military strategy, turned inward, meticulously dissecting sin, desire, and the fundamental nature of obedience. It was within the profound solitude of that cave that extraordinary visions began to unfold. Some accounts suggest he beheld the Virgin Mary herself, radiant in a light so pure it seemed to pierce the very stone walls. Others claim he was granted a panoramic vision of a cosmic battlefield, where human souls hung precariously in the balance, and angels and demons were locked in an eternal spiritual war. What Ignatius himself ultimately confessed was simpler, yet no less profoundly impactful. He experienced an unparalleled clarity, a vivid vision of how the human spirit could be meticulously guided, rigorously disciplined, and strategically trained, much like an army. He began to write, painstakingly scratching his burgeoning thoughts onto pages that would one day coalesce into the spiritual exercises. A foundational manual not of earthly warfare, but of profound spiritual surrender. A potent weapon meticulously forged from silence and absolute obedience. The cave utterly transformed him. The swaggering knight had vanished. In his place stood a man utterly remade, a devoted soldier of God who now perceived the world not as a collection of castles to be stormed and conquered, but as a vast multitude of souls to be spiritually won. His physical armor was gone, but he now carried a far sharper, more potent blade, the unwavering conviction that men could be trained to absolute devotion, bound together in a unity far stronger and more resilient than any forged steel. From that profound darkness, he emerged with an entirely new and compelling mission. He would gather companions, not for the purpose of worldly conquest, but for the unwavering service of Christ. He would forge an order unlike any that had come before, one driven not by the pursuit of riches or prestigious titles, but by an unyielding discipline and absolute obedience. Centuries later, pilgrims still reverently kneel in that very same cave at Manresa. The ancient walls bear the indelible scars of countless candle soot marks. The very air within is heavy, imbued with the echoes of prayers whispered into the profound silence. The cold stone itself seems to remember the heart-wrenching weeping of a broken knight, the faint scratching of his pen, and the transformative tremor of a man utterly remade. From the deep shadows of that humble cave would ultimately emerge the Jesuits, the formidable Society of Jesus. And from the simple, yet profound vow of one broken soldier would rise a spiritual force so meticulously disciplined, so utterly loyal, that both kings and popes would, in time, come to regard it with a mixture of awe and apprehension. The night outside the cave remained utterly still. The river glided silently by, its surface reflecting the shimmering stars above like countless watchful eyes. In that profound silence, a potent seed was planted, one that would, in the fullness of time, blossom into both unparalleled glory and deep-seated suspicion, into fervent devotion and an underlying dread. For in the enduring echo of Ignatius's transformative visions, the spectral shadow of another formidable figure would one day materialize, the man the world would come to call the Black Pope. But for that moment, within the serene confines of the cave at Manresa, there existed only a solitary pilgrim, a flickering candle, and the soft, rhythmic sound of quiet pages turning. The hour deepened, the cave grew darker, and somewhere within that profound, stony silence, the future began its slow, deliberate stirring. Years gracefully unfolded after the pivotal experience in the cave of Manresa. Ignatius of Loyola traversed the roads of Europe, moving with the quiet, purposeful demeanor of a man who carried a secret, burning flame within his soul. He dedicated himself to rigorous study, passionately preached, and steadily gathered a devoted circle of companions, men who, much like himself, felt the compelling call of something far grander and more significant than their individual selves. Their numbers were modest at first, a mere handful of earnest scholars and spiritual seekers, drawn irresistibly by the magnetic charisma of a man who spoke not with thunderous pronouncements, but with a profound, quiet certainty. Paris, the vibrant intellectual hub, became the crucible where their nascent union was forged and refined. In narrow, candlelit student rooms, they prayed together with fervent hearts, engaged in deep discussions about their shared mission, and whispered of ambitious dreams that stretched far beyond the venerable walls of the university. These were men from diverse lands, speaking different tongues, yet a singular, unifying vision bound them inextricably to serve Christ with absolute and unwavering obedience, regardless of where their arduous path might ultimately lead them. It was in 1534 that a truly momentous occasion arrived. On the sacred feast of the Assumption, Ignatius led his small, determined band up the gentle slope of Montmartre, a vantage point offering a sweeping panorama of the spires and shadows of the city below. The hill itself was then a tranquil place, marked only by a humble, weathered chapel whose ancient stones, despite their simplicity, stood poised to bear witness to a solemn vow that would send ripples through the annals of centuries. Inside the modest sanctuary, the candles flickered softly in the warm August air, their flames wavering like fragile, nascent souls. One by one, the companions knelt, their knees pressing firmly into the cold, unyielding stone floor. With their hands placed reverently upon the altar, they swore vows that burned with an almost palpable fire, vows of profound poverty and unblemished chastity, but above all, an extraordinary vow of absolute obedience, not to any earthly crown or kingdom, but solely to God and to the expansive mission that lay before them. They also solemnly promised that should circumstances permit, they would undertake a pilgrimage to Jerusalem, to walk in the sacred footsteps of Christ, and to offer their entire lives in selfless service. It was a moment simultaneously tender and profoundly terrible, for within the spoken words of these men lay a surrender more absolute and complete than any oath of fealty a knight might ever have pledged to his sovereign. These individuals were not, by any conventional measure, knights in resplendent armor. They carried no shining blades or emblazoned shields. Yet, their solemn vows were forged of an unyielding iron, a resolute rejection of all personal riches, an abandonment of creature comforts, a severance of all familial ties, dedicating their very existence solely to a singular, overarching mission and an unwavering, total obedience. As these profound vows resonated and were finally articulated, a palpable silence descended upon the chapel, heavy and all-encompassing. Outside its sacred confines, the bustling city continued its ceaseless, restless rhythm, utterly oblivious to the nascent spiritual storm that had just been kindled and unleashed upon that quiet hill. But within those consecrated walls, a sacred brotherhood had been indelibly sealed. A brotherhood destined to burgeon and evolve into the formidable Society of Jesus. Subsequently, when the Church, in its official capacity, formally recognized and sanctioned their burgeoning order, an additional fourth vow was incorporated. This particular pledge would definitively set the Jesuits apart, marking them as distinct from any other religious order that had preceded them. Beyond the three venerable and traditional vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, they solemnly pledged a fourth, a special, unqualified obedience to the Pope himself, the Holy Father. This was no mere casual promise, no fleeting declaration. Rather, it constituted a profound and binding oath, unequivocally stating their readiness to embark upon any journey, to traverse any terrain, to go wherever the Holy Father deemed fit to send them. This commitment extended even to the uttermost ends of the known earth, if so commanded, requiring their departure without question, without hesitation, and without any personal reservations whatsoever. Such potent and all-encompassing vows endowed them with an extraordinary power and an unshakable sense of purpose. They swiftly became, in essence, an army without conventional swords, yet possessing a discipline more incisive and formidable than any sharpened blade. In an era consumed by widespread chaos and the seismic upheaval of the Reformation, a period when the very fabric of faith itself appeared to fracture and dissolve into myriad dissenting voices, the Jesuits would advance with a formidable unity that both struck fear into the hearts of kings and brought profound solace to successive popes. However, oaths whispered in the hushed, shadowy confines of a chapel carry an immense and enduring weight. And as the centuries inexorably unfolded, a persistent tapestry of rumors and dark legends began to cling tenaciously to these profound vows. Whispers circulated of esoteric rituals, too secret and arcane to ever endure the light of day, of an obedience so utterly absolute that it was said to eclipse the very dictates of individual conscience. Legends were recounted, tales of iron crosses pressed painfully against yielding flesh, of words spoken in solemn blood and consuming fire, binding men in ways that the rational world struggled to comprehend or fully grasp. For the present moment, however, the immediate reality was far quieter and more unassuming. A small, dedicated group of men descended Matra's gentle slope, bathed in the soft, fading light of the day. Their hearts burned with an incandescent flame of zeal and devotion, their lives utterly surrendered to a higher calling. The city below them stirred gently, entirely unaware of the profound brotherhood that had just come into being, In the measured, deliberate rhythm of their steps, one could almost discern the faint, resonant echo of a distant drum beat. Not the urgent cadence of war, but something slower, far steadier, akin to the inexorable rhythm of history itself, subtly shifting its predetermined course. From the transformative vision of a broken soldier, a new, potent order had emerged. Soon, it was destined to become the Pope's sharpest, most incisive blade, his most unswervingly loyal guard, and his most subtle, yet profoundly effective weapon. But loyalty, much like power, is rarely a simple or straightforward affair. Shadows, already long and ominous, stretched out behind them, carrying with them the unsettling, nascent question: if obedience is truly absolute, then to whom does such a formidable and disciplined army genuinely belong? The night drew in, quiet and contemplative, around Matra. The sacred vows had been irrevocably spoken, the transformative fire had been lit, and the world, in its deepest spiritual and political currents, would never again be quite the same. Indeed, the vows exchanged at Matra were akin to isolated sparks falling upon exceedingly dry grass, small and seemingly insignificant at their inception, yet inherently destined to ignite and proliferate into something vast, uncontrollable, and utterly transformative. What commenced as a humble brotherhood, comprising just a handful of devoted individuals, rapidly burgeoned into an army unlike any the Church had ever previously witnessed. These were not men who would don protective armor, nor wield traditional swords in battle. Instead, their chosen weapons were books, instruments of knowledge and intellectual rigor. Their battlefields were not fields of blood and mud, but the hallowed confines of classrooms and the resonant spaces of pulpits. Their intricate strategies were meticulously crafted and executed, not with martial might, but through the deliberate application of ink and the profound power of silence. Yet, their internal discipline was that of the most rigorously trained soldiers, their obedience absolutely unwavering, and their global reach perpetually expanding. When the pivotal papal approval finally arrived in 1540, definitively sealed by the authority of Pope Paul III, the Society of Jesus was officially and formally brought forth into the world. Rome now possessed a formidable new strategic weapon at its immediate disposal, an instrument of immense spiritual and intellectual power. The Pope had been entrusted not with a mere mercenary force, easily swayed by temporal gain, but with something far more profoundly effective and, in a certain sense, more dangerous: a supremely disciplined corps of men. These individuals were prepared to venture where others recoiled in fear, to obey every command without a flicker of hesitation, and to willingly sacrifice personal comfort, familial bonds, and even their very lives for the sake of their sacred mission. They were, in essence, called to wage a profound spiritual war, not with the cold, hard gleam of steel, but with the fervent, indomitable strength of the human spirit. At this tumultuous juncture in history, Europe was tearing itself apart amidst the raging fires of the Protestant Reformation. Long-held certainties, both theological and societal, crumbled into dust. The monolithic structure of faith fractured into countless dissenting voices and interpretations. The venerable authority of Rome itself trembled precariously beneath the thunderous pronouncements of Martin Luther's words and the relentless, pervasive spread of Protestant thought. In the midst of this profound chaos and fragmentation, the Jesuits were strategically positioned to serve as the Pope's elite shock troops, the vanguard army of the Church. They were meticulously trained to restore order where it had dissolved, to reclaim the hearts and minds of the wavering faithful, and to gently, yet firmly, guide them back under the protective embrace of Rome. And so, with an almost unstoppable zeal, they spread outward, radiating like vibrant veins of fire across the vast expanse of the globe. They meticulously constructed schools, not merely with robust walls of stone, but with an ethos that cultivated minds of unparalleled brilliance, providing education not only to the impoverished, but also to the progeny of kings and nobles, thus influencing future generations of leadership. They ascended to positions of immense trust, becoming confessors to powerful princes, quietly whispering counsel and guidance into ears adorned with crowns, subtly shaping political destinies. They embarked on arduous journeys to the far-flung edges of the known world, bravely stepping onto ships that bore them to distant India, enigmatic Japan, ancient China, and the vast, unexplored Americas, lands where the nascent faith was often fragile or entirely foreign, and where they diligently planted the spiritual seeds of Rome in soil that had never before known its tenets. Everywhere these dedicated men ventured, they carried with them the same unwavering discipline, the same rigorous training, and the same absolute, unswerving loyalty to their order. A Jesuit was meticulously taught to perceive himself not as an isolated individual, but as an integral, subservable part of a larger, unified body that moved with a singular, collective will. The superior general, residing in Rome, possessed the power to dispatch a simple letter, and thousands of miles away, a man clad in black robes would dutifully obey its directives without question, as if the command had emanated directly from the divine will of God himself. This represented a form of power unlike anything the Church had ever previously wielded, not armies of steel and brute force, but an intricate, invisible network of interconnected minds and wills. In royal courts, they became highly trusted and influential advisors. In burgeoning universities, they meticulously shaped the intellectual development of the young, molding future leaders and thinkers. In their perilous missions, they stoically endured hunger, violent storms, and the ever-present threat of death, establishing crosses in territories where none had ever stood before. To their staunch supporters, they were unequivocally hailed as heroes, brilliant, courageous, and utterly devoted to their cause. To their numerous and often fearful enemies, however, they were perceived as dangerously effective, excessively disciplined, overly powerful, and far too loyal to an unseen, enigmatic commander. The Pope himself, traditionally garbed in pristine white, served as the visible public face of the Church, its ultimate earthly authority. But now, in his service, he possessed an army clad in austere black, men who answered primarily to one of their own, the superior general, whom some, in hushed tones, would begin to refer to as the Black Pope. This appellation was, of course, unofficial, never formally recognized, and rarely even spoken aloud within the hallowed walls of Rome itself. Yet it grew steadily, like an ever-lengthening shadow. For if the Jesuits rendered him an obedience and loyalty demonstrably greater than that accorded to temporal kings, did that not, by implication, confer upon him the status of a pope of sorts? And so, beneath the awe-inspiring grandeur of St. Peter's Dome, the venerable church had unwittingly given birth to a profound and unsettling paradox. The Jesuits were, without doubt, the Pope's most devoted defenders, his formidable iron shield against both external adversaries and internal dissent. Yet paradoxically, within the very core of their absolute loyalty lay the insidious seed of suspicion. What if the figure they obeyed with such unreserved allegiance was not, in fact, the Pope resplendent in white, but rather the enigmatic one cloaked in black? However, such profound suspicions were largely relegated to the distant future. In these early formative years, the Jesuits moved with the unstoppable force of a fire spreading through dry fields, relentless, pervasive, and often unseen in its subtle influence. Their impassioned sermons filled countless churches with fervent believers. Their meticulously structured classrooms shaped the intellectual and spiritual development of entire generations. Their ambitious missions traversed vast oceans, and with every strategic step they took, their omnipresent influence whispered one undeniable truth. The Pope had indeed found his formidable army, and the entire world would soon feel the profound and far-reaching impact of its unwavering reach. The night descends quietly upon the ancient city of Rome. Within the hallowed Vatican walls, the Pope, arrayed in his ceremonial white, kneels in solemn prayer. But in another, perhaps less public chamber, the general of the Jesuits, clad in his customary black, also offers his fervent prayers. The solemn bells toll, their echoes mingling in the stillness, one emanating from the visible seat of power, the other from a more unseen, yet equally potent, source, both inextricably shaping the complex destiny of Christendom. The Society of Jesus experienced a period of remarkably swift growth, their pervasive presence fanning outward like ever-widening ripples in a vast body of water. This expansion continued relentlessly until kings and bishops alike, across the European continent and beyond, began to discern and feel the profound weight of their pervasive influence. Yet, behind the myriad of their far-flung missions and their distinguished educational institutions, indeed, behind every eloquent preacher, every trusted confessor, and every brilliant scholar, stood one singular, pivotal man. He was their undisputed leader, their supreme commander, the figure they referred to simply as the superior general. Unlike other generals, whether of military or even spiritual orders, he wielded no physical sword, inhabited no opulent palace, and wore no outward crown to signify his temporal authority. His immense power and authority rested instead in the meticulous directives contained within letters carried across vast oceans, in the discreet, whispered orders passed from hand to hand, and in an unbroken, unyielding chain of absolute obedience that stretched seamlessly from his humble residence in Rome to the most distant, perilous frontiers of their global enterprise. The Pope, the visible head of the Church, might sit enthroned in pristine white, universally adored by the faithful millions. But within the disciplined confines of the Jesuit order, it was unequivocally the superior general whose every word bore the unassailable weight of law, whose every command possessed the power to bend the will of thousands of highly educated and dedicated men. He lived a life of remarkable simplicity within a modest residence situated in Rome, largely devoid of outward pomp. Yet his strategic reach extended far beyond the ornate marble corridors of the Vatican. From those quiet, unassuming rooms, decisions were meticulously made that possessed the power to redirect the entire education of princes in distant Paris, to dictate the rigorous training of missionaries bound for Goa, to influence the intricate fate of a royal court in Beijing, and even to shape the very content and delivery of sermons preached in far-off Mexico. His meticulously crafted letters were as precise in their instruction as they were absolute in their demand for compliance, permitting no debate, tolerating no delay. And for the multitude of men who had solemnly vowed such profound obedience, these commands were not mere suggestions to be considered, but rather the very breath of destiny itself, shaping their every action and purpose. It is therefore little wonder that, over time, persistent rumors began to bloom and proliferate. Whispers circulated, speaking of the superior general as a pope in all but official name, a powerful figure clothed not in the traditional white of the pontiff, but in the austere black of his order. Some even went so far as to claim, with growing conviction, that his formidable authority rivaled, and perhaps even surpassed, that of the pontiff himself. For while the pope was inherently bound by the intricate strictures of ceremony, the deliberations of councils, and the scrutinizing eyes of the entire world, the Jesuit general operated largely in silence, his directives often unrecorded, his movements largely unseen. Yet despite this lack of public display, he was obeyed without the slightest hesitation by his devoted order. To the reigning monarchs of Europe, this burgeoning perception was a truly chilling thought. For what king could truly rest easily, knowing that within his own royal court stood a Jesuit confessor, a man who might whisper intimate guidance into the king's very ears, yet whose ultimate, unswerving loyalty lay not with the crown, but with a distant, enigmatic figure residing in Rome? The superior general, through his vast network of agents, possessed the subtle yet profound ability, with merely the turn of a carefully chosen phrase, to sway a sovereign's conscience. And a conscience so swayed, particularly in matters of state or faith, held the immense power to irrevocably alter the very fate of an entire nation. Even within the hierarchical structure of the Church itself, a discernible undercurrent of suspicion began to stir. Cardinals, in their private deliberations, wondered if papal conclaves, the sacred process of electing a new pope, were truly free of external influence when Jesuit minds so demonstrably shaped the thoughts and perspectives of so many influential electors. Was there not, some quietly questioned, a hidden hand subtly guiding outcomes from the shadows, manipulating the very course of the Church's future? The appellation, Black Pope, was never formally recognized, nor was it ever uttered aloud within the hallowed confines of the Vatican. Nevertheless, this unofficial designation adhered to him with an almost tangible persistence, akin to a somber garment woven from threads of both apprehension and fascination. The color black was attributed to his characteristic vestments, to the profound veil of secrecy enshrouding his formidable authority, and to the hushed, almost imperceptible manner in which his directives were invariably executed. For those who held steadfast to their faith, he was perceived as the vigilant protector of the reigning pontiff, the meticulous custodian of the Church's most formidable instrument. Conversely, to his numerous adversaries, he loomed as a shadowy, ethereal sovereign whose dominion was invisibly established within the deepest recesses of obscurity. Yet, despite this formidable reputation, the individual himself seldom made public appearances, in stark contrast to the Pope, who frequently bestowed blessings upon vast congregations of the faithful. The superior general maintained an almost constant state of invisibility, a figure whose existence was acknowledged primarily by name, his profound influence keenly sensed, but rarely, if ever, visually confirmed. It was precisely this pervasive elusiveness that amplified his enigmatic aura. For power that remains concealed often appears more potent and boundless than authority openly displayed, and the subtle murmurs concerning unseen forces invariably evoke a more profound sense of dread than any spectacle witnessed by the eye. Envision Rome as twilight descends, the majestic dome of the Vatican shimmering with a golden luminescence against the darkening firmament. Pilgrims are observed kneeling reverently in St. Peter's Square, their gazes directed skyward toward the Pope, who extends his greetings from his elevated balcony. Simultaneously, within a secluded chamber nestled along a more tranquil thoroughfare, the Jesuit general refrains from public gestures or pronouncements. Instead, he meticulously composes his correspondence, his hand steady and deliberate, thereby meticulously charting the trajectory of his religious order, and through its intricate machinations, profoundly influencing the very destiny of nations. The resonant pealing of the bells echoes across the ancient city, and their lingering vibrations seem to carry two distinct voices, one resonating for the Pope, resplendent in white, and another for the general, cloaked in black. These represent two formidable powers, intricately interwoven yet fundamentally separate, one overtly visible, the other shrouded in mystery. It was within this compelling dynamic of tension and contrast that the enduring legend of the Black Pope began to firmly establish itself, a mythos destined to captivate and intrigue for countless centuries to come. As the night deepens further, the solitary candle flame dwindles, casting dancing shadows, and in the profound stillness of Rome's hidden corners, the silent figure of the superior general stands, his presence imbued with a palpable gravity, his immense power unseen, yet perpetually poised to subtly reorient the global landscape. Authority, when deliberately veiled in silence, invariably becomes the genesis of myth and legend. And so it proved to be with the esteemed Society of Jesus, the Jesuits. Their solemn vows, initially articulated upon the venerable stone floor of Matra, swiftly became the nucleus of hushed whispers and burgeoning anxieties that intensified in volume and breadth concurrently with the expansion of their formidable influence. In the bustling taverns, within the opulent courts of royalty, and throughout the clandestine enclaves of Europe, individuals conversed in low tones about pledges so absolutely binding, so profoundly rigorous, that they transcended mere promises, instead resembling formidable shackles forged in the deepest shadows. The Jesuits themselves articulated their sacred vows with unadorned clarity, poverty, chastity, obedience, and that fourth, particularly incisive pledge of unwavering fealty to the Pope. Yet the human imagination frequently embellishes realities with darker and more dramatic flourishes than simple truth would dictate. The inherent secrecy surrounding their rigorous training regimen, their enigmatic and disciplined comportment, and their unwavering obedience that brooked no hesitation. All these elements collectively conspired to weave a pervasive shroud of apprehension around their distinguished order. What precisely were the solemn commitments exchanged behind their meticulously sealed doors, within sacred chapels where no sentient witness, save for the silent stone and the omnipresent God, could possibly overhear? Rumors circulated, breathlessly recounting clandestine rituals performed within dimly lit candlelight chambers. Men clad in their distinctive black robes were said to kneel before a crucifix, solemnly swearing to embark upon any mission, to execute any command, even if the ultimate consequence was certain death. Some narratives spoke of searing iron crosses pressed against bare flesh, of the ominous gleam of daggers resting beside hallowed altars, and of vows that purportedly demanded absolute silence, even under the duress of torture, a loyalty extending far beyond the dictates of personal conscience. Antagonists of the order diligently disseminated inflammatory pamphlets, meticulously portraying the Jesuits as insidious conspirators who had sworn to destabilize monarchical thrones, to subjugate entire nations to their will, and to pledge their ultimate allegiance to their general in Rome, even above the authority of their own sovereign rulers. The persistent question remained, was this a reflection of verifiable truth, or merely the amplified voice of deeply ingrained fear? History, regrettably, seldom offers such pristine distinctions. However, what remains unequivocally certain is that the Jesuit vow of obedience was fundamentally unlike any other known at the time. Whereas other religious orders might engage in deliberative discourse, seek collective counsel, or even permit a degree of flexibility rooted in conscience, the Jesuit was rigorously indoctrinated with the principle that obedience must be absolute, instantaneous, and joyfully rendered. To act not with any trace of hesitation, but rather as an inert instrument in the hands of the order, as Ignatius himself famously articulated, dead to self, alive only to command. Such profound declarations simultaneously inspired fervent devotion and provoked considerable unease. For the devout faithful, this absolute submission was revered as the ultimate expression of perfect devotion, a complete surrender to the divine will that effectively purged all vestiges of personal pride and self-determination. To the reigning monarchs and princes of the era, however, this doctrine proved far more disquieting. For what sovereign could truly govern with tranquility, knowing that a man within his own court, perhaps a Jesuit confessor, owed his most profound allegiance not to the crown he served, but to a distant and powerful general residing in Rome? Thus, the very nature of the Jesuit oath became a subject simultaneously inspiring profound awe and engendering deep suspicion. Enemies vehemently denounced it as sinister, describing it as a pledge forged in the crucible of darkness, imbued with the unyielding strength of fire and iron. Conversely, its proponents extolled it as holy, the epitome of the highest spiritual discipline. Yet, on one point, all parties concurred. There existed no form of obedience in the world comparable to that practiced by the Jesuits. Imagine for a moment a venerable stone chapel veiled in the quietude of night. The air within is cool, heavy with the fragrant aroma of incense. A small congregation of men kneels, their elongated shadows stretching and bending across the ancient floor. Candles flicker gently, their delicate flames trembling as if they too are intently listening. The crucifix suspended above them gleams with a faint, golden luminescence. One by one, voices rise, low and steady, articulating words of profound surrender, declarations that irrevocably seal futures yet unwritten. The resonant echo of those solemn vows lingers long after the men have risen, a spiritual weight deeply impressed into the very stones of the edifice. Centuries subsequent to these events, numerous pamphlets and polemical writings would grossly exaggerate these accounts, meticulously weaving elaborate narratives of gleaming knives and spilled blood, of insidious and clandestine pledges. Yet, even divested of such fanciful inventions, The fundamental truth of the Jesuit vow remained piercingly clear: an absolute obedience rendered in profound silence, without any semblance of question. It was precisely this form of unwavering compliance that rendered them, in the estimation of many, the most impeccably disciplined spiritual army the Catholic Church had ever known. The night itself seems to hold its breath in anticipation. The candles continue to burn low, their light diminishing. And in the profound quietude, the immense weight of those ancient oaths still appears to stir, as if whispered promises continue to cling to the very air like ephemeral smoke. Promises imbued with the intensity of fire. Promises forged with the unyielding strength of iron. Commitments that would ultimately propel the Jesuits to the remotest corners of the globe and directly into the pulsating heart of recorded history itself. Emerging from the profound silence of their sacred vows, the Jesuits ventured forth into the tumultuous clamor of the wider world. Europe, their initial sphere of operation, proved to be merely the prologue to their grander narrative. Their overarching mission was unequivocally universal, and the Pope's authoritative command propelled them outwards with the focused velocity of arrows loosed from a taut bow, traversing vast oceans and arid deserts, penetrating dense jungles and unfamiliar urban centers. These black-robed soldiers of Christ carried with them their formidable discipline, their extensive scholarly tomes, and their unwavering faith. They were by nature indefatigable voyagers. Some embarked upon ships departing from the bustling ports of Lisbon and Seville, their gazes steadfastly fixed upon distant horizons where the boundless expanse of sea and sky merged into an endless, shifting gray. Others journeyed on arduous caravans, battling through swirling dust and relentless winds, as the distinctive banners of foreign kingdoms gradually emerged on the distant landscape. Wherever humanity had not yet encountered the sacred name of Christ, or had demonstrably distanced itself from the embracing tenets of Rome, the Jesuits were unequivocally commanded to go. Francis Xavier rapidly ascended to become their inaugural, towering figure of legend. His missionary expeditions were of such immense scope and duration that they often seemed to transcend the boundaries of mere historical fact, instead resembling epic myths. From his point of origin in Portugal, he sailed resolutely eastward, making significant contact with Goa, often referred to as the Pearl of India, before venturing further to Malacca, Japan, and the fabled, much-dreamed-of Empire of China. He personally administered baptism to thousands, diligently acquired languages entirely alien to his native tongue, and penned letters that radiated with an incandescent spiritual zeal. His eventual demise on a desolate island, his gaze fixed across the vast waters towards a Chinese mainland he would never reach, became an enduring emblem of Jesuit sacrifice, symbolizing a life utterly expended at the uttermost boundaries of the known world. Numerous others followed in his formidable footsteps. Matteo Ricci, a scholar whose profound intellect was cloaked in genuine humility, successfully gained entry into the sophisticated Ming court in China. He meticulously adopted the attire and mannerisms of a Confucian sage, conversed with a wisdom that commanded the profound respect of the learned mandarins, and presented meticulously crafted maps that effectively redrew the world's geographical understanding for the reigning emperors. His brilliant mind served as both a bridge between disparate cultures and a potent intellectual instrument, deftly integrating Western scientific principles with profound Eastern philosophical thought. thereby subtly planting the seeds of faith in regions where military conquest could never have succeeded. Within the verdant, dense jungles of South America, Jesuits meticulously established their renowned reductions, meticulously planned villages where the indigenous Guarani people and the European missionaries coexisted harmoniously, seamlessly integrating manual labor, communal prayer, and musical expression. For some observers, these settlements represented veritable utopias of spiritual faith and social equality. For others, however, they posed direct challenges to the rapacious avarice of colonial powers, serving as protected havens that actively resisted widespread exploitation. The ethereal sound of Guarani choirs, their voices harmonizing hymns beneath the towering forest canopies, became one of the most uniquely beautiful and haunting melodies ever to grace the nascent New World. Across the sprawling expanse of the globe, the Jesuits left an indelible array of traces, intricate astronomical charts, carefully compiled in Beijing, flourishing educational institutions established in Mexico City, and majestic churches rising proudly along the sun-drenched coasts of India. They were not conquerors wielding swords, yet their profound influence often penetrated far deeper and proved more enduring than any military subjugation. They assiduously learned indigenous languages, meticulously translated sacred scriptures, engaged in rigorous debates with local philosophers, and imparted invaluable knowledge in mathematics, geography, and music. In every single endeavor, they proudly carried the banner of Rome. And in every distant land they reached, their unyielding obedience served as an unbreakable tether, linking them directly back to the formidable superior general in faraway Rome. However, with such expansive global reach, invariably came an escalating tide of suspicion. Monarchs who had initially welcomed them as trusted advisors occasionally grew wary of their ultimate loyalties. Colonists, driven primarily by the pursuit of profit, deeply resented the Jesuits' staunch defense of indigenous populations. Rival clergy, observing their burgeoning influence, often harbored profound envy, and in every bustling port, in every opulent court, and within every remote jungle mission, a pervasive, shadowy question persistently lingered. Were these men truly serving the divine will of Christ? Or were they, in fact, clandestine agents of a different, more obscure will, operating as part of a hidden empire secretly governed by the enigmatic man in black? Yet notwithstanding the proliferation of rumors and accusations, the sheer courage displayed by the Jesuits was utterly undeniable. They fearlessly entered leper colonies and plague-stricken cities at times when all others fled in terror. They embarked upon perilous sea voyages, fully cognizant that death by tempest, virulent disease, or brutal martyrdom awaited them. They painstakingly compiled dictionaries of languages that had never before been committed to written form. They stood with unwavering resolve before powerful kings in gilded palaces and before indigenous tribes in open fields, consistently embodying the same rigorous discipline, the same unwavering vows, and the same quietly burning spiritual flame. Imagine them now, if you will, dispersed across every continent, like a multitude of stars forming a constellation too vast and intricate for the human eye to fully comprehend. Picture a Jesuit, clad in his black robes, standing reverently before a Japanese daimyo, executing a bow of meticulous respect. Envision another kneeling humbly in a rustic forest hut, patiently teaching indigenous children to sing sacred hymns beneath the dappled shadows of swaying palm trees. And yet another, pacing thoughtfully within an imperial court, meticulously unrolling intricate maps that by their very design symbolically positioned Rome at the undisputed center of the world. Though continually separated by vast distances, a profound allegiance bound them to Rome's invisible decree. As twilight deepened its hues across the expansive oceans, the celestial tapestry unfurled boundlessly, presenting an identical spectacle over the ancient lands of Europe, the venerable empire of China, and the verdant, unexplored territories of the New World. Beneath this shared canopy of stars, the members of the Society of Jesus, or Jesuits, pursued their arduous mission with an unwavering, quiet determination, extending their spiritual endeavors to the farthest reaches of human habitation. With the persistent propagation of the Jesuit order across disparate continents, their pervasive influence permeated not merely the humble confines of remote villages and burgeoning missions, but also ascended to the highly exclusive and opulent chambers of various royal courts. Their paramount vocation was the spiritual guidance of souls, and it was not long before the most esteemed and influential personages of Europe's monarchies inclined their attentive ears toward the sagacious counsel offered by the Jesuits. These men consequently assumed the intimate and pivotal role of confessors to reigning kings and queens. Clad in their unassuming black vestments, they would kneel within lavish, silk-draped private apartments, privy to hushed disclosures that no courtier, no military general, nor any governmental minister was ever permitted to overhear. A confessor, by virtue of his sacred office, wields an enigmatic authority, concealed behind the inviolable sanctity of the confessional's secrecy. Monarchs would unburden their innermost selves, revealing a torrent of transgressions, uncertainties, anxieties, and allurements. And there, listening with profound stillness, stood the Jesuit, solemnly sworn to absolute discretion, yet simultaneously bound by an unyielding fealty to his higher authority situated in Rome. The confessions imparted by these sovereign rulers encompassed not solely the personal transgressions of the flesh, but crucially, also encompassed momentous decisions of state, the initiation of military campaigns, the delicate forging of strategic alliances, and the painful execution of political betrayals. Within that profoundly intimate exchange, the Jesuits' softly spoken admonitions or reassurances possessed the potential to subtly reorient the moral compass of a ruler, and in so doing, to irrevocably alter the trajectory and destiny of entire nations. Within the Iberian Peninsula, specifically Spain, Jesuit confessors provided shrewd advisement to the formidable Habsburg monarchs, those emperors whose extensive dominions spanned from the heart of Europe to the newly discovered territories of the New World. They imparted their nuanced counsel in hushed tones to Philip II, a monarch characterized by both fervent piety and a pervasive suspicion, whose vast empire perpetually existed beneath the looming shadow of the infamous Inquisition. Across the Pyrenees in France, Jesuits ascended to positions as trusted counselors to the Bourbon kings, meticulously calibrating the intricate equilibrium between the power of the crown and the authority of the Church. Even within the more precarious and politically volatile courts of nations like Poland and Portugal, their persuasive voices subtly permeated the ears of the reigning sovereigns, earnestly advocating for heightened religious devotion, issuing stern warnings against the encroaching threat of heresy, and artfully navigating the delicate interplay between secular monarchy and the ecclesiastical authority of Rome. This was an influence that proved simultaneously subtle in its execution and immeasurable in its overall impact. For what governmental minister could ever engage in discourse with a king with the same candidness and intimacy as a confessor? What military general could ever exert such a profound and direct pressure upon the very conscience of a monarch? Nonetheless, it was an influence invariably shrouded in profound silence. No individual beyond the confessional's sacred space could ever discern the precise words exchanged. No outsider possessed knowledge of the specific guidance offered, the spiritual penances prescribed, or the solemn warnings uttered within the hushed sanctity of royal chapels and private bedchambers. It was this impenetrable secrecy, paradoxically, that inevitably fostered and intensified public suspicion. Adversaries of the order frequently leveled accusations against the Jesuits, alleging their manipulation of royal thrones and their clandestine orchestration of events from behind the opulent velvet curtains of power. Numerous pamphlets circulated widely, explicitly accusing them of shaping national policy through the power of whispered absolutions and of coercing kings to bend to the will of the enigmatic Black Pope in Rome. Regardless of the veracity of these claims, the accusations stubbornly adhered to their reputation, for it is an immutable truth that secrecy, by its very nature, invariably cultivates apprehension and fear. And yet, paradoxically, monarchs themselves often steadfastly clung to their Jesuit confessors, deeply valuing their unwavering loyalty and rigorous discipline. Unlike the typical courtiers who were perpetually driven by a relentless hunger for personal power and material gain, the Jesuit possessed no wife, no personal estate, and no inheritance to actively pursue. His devotion to his vows and his mission was absolute, his counsel meticulously shaped by a stringent internal discipline, and his voice remained remarkably steady and composed, even when the external world erupted in political turmoil and societal chaos. For rulers who bore the immensely crushing psychological weight of their crowns, such an anchor of stability and disinterest offered a profound sense of solace, even if its very nature occasionally generated a subtle unease. Envision a grand chamber within the magnificent palaces of Versailles or El Escorial. The ceilings above shimmered with intricate gilding, and the chandeliers cast a soft, radiant glow from their myriad candles. In distant, adjacent rooms, courtiers exchanged hushed whispers and furtive glances. But here, nestled within a secluded, curtained alcove, the king knelt, softly murmuring his sins into the ear of a man clad solely in the austere simplicity of black robes. The Jesuit listened intently, his countenance serene, his responses measured and few. Yet, the profound echo of their intimate exchange held the potential to reverberate through future treaties, ignite devastating wars, and alter the very course of dynasties. While the Pope in Rome continued to preside, majestically enthroned in his pristine white vestments, revered by the adoring masses of Christendom, it was within these private royal chambers that the Jesuit confessor subtly molded the very heart of monarchs, gently touched the conscience of sovereigns, and silently wielded the formidable power to subtly influence the destinies of vast empires. And standing as a pervasive, almost ethereal presence behind all of them, like an immense shadow cast from an unseen, distant source, was the superior general, widely known as the Black Pope. He diligently received encrypted missives, meticulously issued directives, and his invisible hand was perhaps subtly present even within the softest, most confidential words exchanged between a king and his spiritual confessor. The night deepened further, and the candles, once bright, now flickered low within the resplendent, gilded courts. Outside, the world continued its boisterous activity, yet within the sacred confines of the chamber, an absolute silence descended. And in that profound quietude, the whisper of a Jesuit to a king might have been the most delicate sound imaginable, yet simultaneously, it was also arguably the most perilous. That very proximity and intimate access, which rendered Jesuit confessors utterly invaluable to Europe's monarchs, concurrently cast a long and disquieting shadow across the royal courts of the continent. For while the kings themselves deeply valued and cherished the counsel they received, ministers and nobles within the court often regarded the Jesuits with deeply suspicious and wary eyes. Who, indeed, could ever hope to rival such an extraordinary degree of influence, an ascendancy not acquired through the might of armies or the accumulation of vast treasure, but rather through the impenetrable secrecy of the conscience's most private chambers? To a significant number of observers, these black-robed priests appeared less like humble, self-effacing servants of Christ, and considerably more like clandestine architects of political power. In France, this pervasive unease intensified markedly. The ruling Bourbon dynasty, in particular, relied heavily upon the spiritual guidance and political counsel of their Jesuit confessors. Nevertheless, murmurs of suspicion began to circulate amongst the nobility and the rival clergy, alleging that these men were actively steering royal policy from behind the opulent velvet curtains of the Palace of Versailles. Pamphlets, often inflammatory in their content, were widely distributed through the bustling streets of Parisian, portraying the Jesuits as cunning schemers whose ultimate loyalty was pledged not to France, but to a shadowy, formidable figure in Rome, their superior general, the individual commonly referred to as the Black Pope. Each burgeoning rumor, each new accusation, served to fuel a simmering, underlying fear that the true will of the reigning kings was not genuinely their own, but rather words subtly whispered into their ears by unseen, manipulative lips. Spain, too, experienced a palpable tremor of suspicion throughout its court. The devout Habsburg emperors, so fervent in their adherence to the Catholic faith, were widely believed to habitually align their political strategies with Jesuit guidance. Ministers at court frequently whispered that Spain's vast and sprawling global empire was directed not solely by the monarch himself, but by the confessor who was privy to his most profound secrets. And in the distant kingdom of Portugal, a similar vein of distrust took firm root. Both nobles and bishops voiced grave warnings that the Jesuits were intricately weaving webs of influence that were far too complex, too dangerous, and too deeply intertwined within the very fabric of royal bloodlines. The escalating tension occasionally erupted into overt conflict. Rival factions within the court actively plotted to marginalize the Jesuits, striving to banish them entirely from the royal chambers. Furthermore, whenever a significant tragedy befell the kingdom, be it a devastating failed harvest, the ignominious loss of a war, or the shocking assassination of a king, the blame was often swiftly and unfairly cast upon the Jesuits, as though their very presence carried an inherent curse. To their numerous adversaries, the Jesuits were emphatically not perceived as benevolent guardians of conscience, but rather as cunning puppeteers deftly manipulating the strings of destiny. And yet, even amidst this tempest of widespread suspicion and open hostility, monarchs frequently demonstrated an unwavering reluctance to part with their Jesuit confessors. For the Jesuit confessor offered something truly unique, something that no ambitious courtier, no influential bishop could ever replicate, a voice utterly unswayed by the allure of material wealth, an ear bound by an unbreakable vow of silence, and a loyalty that extended far beyond the fickle and shifting currents of political expediency. In the profound and often isolating burden of sovereign rule, such uniquely steadfast and discreet counsel could not be easily relinquished. Still, the accusations continued to fester and proliferate. In contemporary paintings and sharply satirical prints, Jesuits were often depicted with sinister, dark wings, crouching surreptitiously behind royal thrones, whispering insidious poison into the ears of unsuspecting kings. Their formidable reputation grew not solely from verifiable truth, but fundamentally from a deep-seated fear. It was a fear of the unseen, of conversations forever concealed behind impenetrable veils of secrecy. Imagine a lavish banquet unfolding in a grand royal palace. Golden plates shimmered under the soft light. Strains of elegant music drifted gracefully through the gilded halls, and courtiers laughed melodiously behind their jeweled masks. Yet, beneath this veneer of joyous festivity, an underlying current of unease subtly permeated the atmosphere. At the far end of the expansive hall, a Jesuit moved with quiet discretion at the side of his king. He uttered no spoken words, laid no claim to a prominent place at the banquet table. And yet, when the multitude of candles had finally been extinguished and the last of the revelers had departed, it would be he who would kneel beside the sovereign, intently listening to the most intimate confessions of the royal heart. To some, that particular sight was profoundly reassuring, a symbol of spiritual guidance and moral rectitude. To others, however, it was utterly terrifying, a chilling testament to hidden power. For in that silent, profoundly private exchange between priest and king, the delicate line separating the throne of man from the throne of God seemed to blur indistinctly. And in that unsettling ambiguity, suspicion only intensified and spread. As the centuries inexorably unfolded, these shadows of distrust lengthened considerably. The Jesuits had undeniably stepped directly into the very epicenter of political power. But with every stride they took, they invariably drew more scrutinizing eyes, provoked more challenging questions, and ignited more pervasive fears. And within the hushed, labyrinthine corridors of royal palaces, suspicion clung to them with the tenacious persistence of incense in the air, sweet yet heavy, and ultimately impossible to dissipate entirely. The night now seems to soften, as though the world itself collectively sighed with a lingering sense of unease. And in that profound quietude, one can almost discern the faint, spectral echo of those long-vanished courts, of suspicion swirling like hushed whispers in the flickering candlelight halls, of Jesuits moving in their characteristic silence, never quite fully trusted, yet paradoxically, never entirely dismissed from their pivotal roles. The designation was never formally sanctioned, yet it possessed a gravitas far exceeding that of any royal crown. In hushed, almost reverent tones across the breadth of Europe, individuals began to speak of the Papa Nero, the Black Pope. It was not a title bestowed through formal ceremony, or ecclesiastical decree, but rather one born organically from a potent blend of rumor, pervasive fear, and a profound sense of awe. While the white pope, resplendent in his radiant white vestments, stood forth before the entire world as the undisputed vicar of Christ, another profoundly influential figure, clad in the stark simplicity of black, quietly commanded a more discreet, yet intensely disciplined, spiritual empire. He was the superior general of the Society of Jesus, the formidable man to whom every single Jesuit member had solemnly sworn an oath of absolute, unyielding obedience. The unofficial title of Black Pope inherently carried a profound sense of contradiction. A pope who was not, in fact, the pope, a sovereign figure without a visible throne, a ruler largely unseen by the public eye, yet whose pervasive influence was profoundly and unmistakably felt. The general himself resided not within the opulent grandeur of palaces, but rather within the austere, sober confines of the Jesuit curia in Rome, his personal chambers unadorned, and his garments devoid of any ostentation. Yet from these outwardly modest rooms emanated a meticulously organized network of spiritual and political influence that effectively encircled the entire globe. Every Jesuit missionary diligently working in distant China, every dedicated teacher imparting knowledge in a French college, and every confessor whispering counsel into the ear of a monarch, all owed their primary, unwavering loyalty not to any earthly king, nor even directly to the visible pope clad in white, but unequivocally to the powerful man in black. It was this profound and unusual chain of spiritual allegiance that ignited a deep sense of disquiet across Europe. For unlike the traditional monastic orders of the era, the members of the Society of Jesus, known as Jesuits, undertook a singular fourth vow, an unreserved pledge to journey wherever the reigning pope might direct them, without the slightest hesitation or the briefest delay. Yet, in practical terms, it was the superior general, the elected leader of their order, who meticulously orchestrated their missions, deploying these devoted priests with the strategic precision of a seasoned commander moving his forces across the intricate tapestry of Christendom. Consequently, this powerful figure, often referred to colloquially as the Black Pope due to his dark vestments, began to be perceived by many as a clandestine sovereign, subtly wielding authority over an expansive cadre of spiritual warriors, their presence felt everywhere yet rarely overtly seen. Murmurings, like an insidious current, began to ripple through the ancient streets of Rome. Some voices dared to assert that the general's formidable authority eclipsed even the sacred power of the Holy Father himself. "The Pope rules the Church," they would whisper conspiratorially, their words laced with both fear and fascination. But the Black Pope rules the Pope. This audacious declaration possessed a dangerous, almost irresistible allure, an idea that found fertile ground and lingered persistently in the smoky confines of taverns, within the hushed corridors of chancelleries, and even in the opulent antechambers of powerful kings. Beyond the capital, witty satirists of the age vividly depicted him as a cunning spider, positioned at the very heart of an intricate, invisible web, deftly manipulating unseen threads of influence that extended from the nascent colonies of New Spain all the way to the sophisticated royal palaces of Paris. And yet, the underlying reality, as often is the case, proved to be far more nuanced and subtly complex than these dramatic portrayals suggested. The Black Pope, in truth, wore no resplendent tiara. nor did he ever issue the weighty proclamations known as papal bulls. His formidable power resided not in formal decree or overt command, but rather in the absolute, unwavering discipline he instilled within his order. To his devoted Jesuits, his every utterance was an inviolable directive. To the world beyond the society, his enigmatic silence often proved profoundly unnerving, hinting at a hidden depth of strategic thought and influence. With merely a single, concisely penned letter, he possessed the capacity to recall a seasoned missionary from the distant reaches of Peru, to reroute brilliant scholars towards the far-flung academic centers of Asia, or to strategically position a trusted confessor beside a monarch at precisely the most opportune political juncture. It consistently appeared that Jesuits were invariably present at those pivotal junctures where the grand narrative of history seemed poised to alter its predetermined course. One might easily envision him in the soft glow of candlelight, the general himself seated at a remarkably simple, unassuming desk, a vast, unfurled map of the world spread out before him, tiny, precisely placed pins marking the myriad missions scattered across the globe. Just outside his austere chamber, young novices would tread the ancient stone corridors in a profound, almost reverent silence, their footsteps barely audible. Far beyond the venerable walls of Rome, majestic galleons traversed treacherous oceans, bearing letters secreted away in hidden pouches, while a continuous stream of detailed reports flowed back to him from every kingdom and colonial outpost. He required no vast armies of soldiers to enforce his will. His unique empire was meticulously constructed from the humble materials of ink, parchment, and an unshakable, absolute obedience. This potent image both captivated and deeply disquieted his contemporaries. The Church itself found itself oscillating between profound reverence for their intellectual prowess and a palpable fear of their unified strength. Popes frequently relied upon the unparalleled brilliance and unwavering loyalty of the Jesuits. Yet at times they recoiled, almost instinctively, at their astonishing unity, their formidable discipline, and their uncanny ability to move and act as a single, indivisible body. Monarchs, too, found themselves in a state of vacillation, expressing gratitude for the loyal and insightful confessors provided by the Society, yet simultaneously harboring a deep wariness regarding the Jesuits' ultimate unspoken allegiance. No other religious order of priests appeared so inextricably bound to the will of a single individual, and no man seemed so paradoxically cloaked in both austere simplicity and immense unseen power. It was perhaps an inevitable consequence that a rich tapestry of legends and myths began to proliferate around him. Some imaginations conjured images of secret subterranean chambers beneath the very foundations of Rome, where the general and his most trusted companions convened in hushed, candlelight councils, secretly deliberating and deciding the very fate of nations. Others went further, solemnly swearing that he commanded sway over hidden vaults overflowing with untold treasures, that he cunningly manipulated the intricate politics of wars and the successions of dynasties, and that even the white pope himself, the visible head of the Church, could not act without the black pope's silent, implicit consent. Such fantastical tales, it must be acknowledged, were meticulously embroidered upon a foundation of deep-seated fear and suspicion. Yet, once woven, they clung with the tenacious persistence of ivy to the imposing figure of the Black Pope, proving utterly impossible to strip away or dispel. However, if one dares to approach closer, if one endeavors to soften the harsh, exaggerated outlines of rumor and speculation. What ultimately remains is even more profoundly mysterious. One encounters a man chosen not through the accident of inheritance, but through the democratic process of a vote within his order. He was not crowned with the ostentatious symbols of earthly splendor, but was himself bound by the same rigorous vows of obedience, his true power residing not in overt dominance or coercion, but in the unshakable, almost spiritual unity of his entire order. His simple black robes, devoid of any glittering jewels or precious adornments, paradoxically seemed heavier than any royal mantle, for they bore the immense, invisible weight of unseen empires of influence and spiritual authority. And so, as the whole of Europe continued to whisper tales of the Black Pope, the potent myth and the actual man blurred inextricably into a single, enigmatic entity. Perhaps it was not his actual tangible authority that rendered him so widely feared, but rather the profound silence that enveloped him, the impenetrable secrecy of his operations, and the extraordinary discipline of his order, qualities that no outsider could ever fully comprehend or penetrate. For it was precisely into that profound silence, that impenetrable void of information, that the human imagination, untamed and unbridled, eagerly rushed to fill, painting him in contradictory hues, at once a revered saint and a spectral presence, a trusted confessor and a cunning conspirator. The candle now flickers low, its flame struggling against the encroaching darkness. The shadows within the chamber lengthen, stretching and distorting. The enigmatic figure of the Black Pope recedes into the deep, dark corridors of ancient Rome, where his footsteps echo softly, almost imperceptibly, where his powerful presence is undeniably felt, but very rarely, if ever, truly seen. Stoulon. And in that lingering, profound quiet, a singular, haunting question drifts through the air like smoke. Was he merely a humble servant of God, or was he in truth the silent keeper of a power too vast, too immeasurable, for the world to fully grasp or adequately name? The Jesuit vow, in its radical simplicity, stood apart from every other sacred oath. While the venerable monastic orders traditionally pledged themselves to poverty, chastity, and obedience to their immediate superiors, the Jesuits introduced a distinctive fourth vow, a solemn promise often whispered in the hushed sanctity of dim chapels, illuminated solely by the ethereal glow of flickering candles, where young men knelt with hearts that often trembled with a mixture of awe and trepidation. They committed themselves not merely to an abstract loyalty to the Holy Church, but to an absolute immediate readiness to embark upon any mission, to journey wherever the Supreme Pontiff commanded them, whether it be across parched deserts, over vast, tumultuous oceans, into the gilded halls of palaces, or even within the grim confines of prisons, all without a moment's hesitation or the slightest question. The ritual itself, despite its immense implications, was remarkably unadorned. Yet it imbued the air with an undeniable aura of profound mystery. A superior, a seasoned Jesuit, would lean intimately close to the kneeling novice, the faint, rustling sound of his black robes subtly breaking the profound silence, and then utter the solemn words that would irrevocably bind the young man to a life characterized by utter, complete surrender. They were to become, as one particularly striking phrase declared in Latin, perinde ac cadaver, meaning precisely as a corpse, a lifeless, pliant body in the hands of obedience, unresisting, malleable, utterly devoid of any independent will of its own. To the uninitiated outsiders, This stark language often seemed deeply chilling, evoking the unsettling notion that these men had willingly relinquished not only their personal freedom, but in some profound sense, their very humanity. However, within the sacred confines of the order itself, this radical concept was revered as the ultimate mark of highest devotion, a profound readiness to be guided and moved by the divine will of God, wherever that inscrutable will might lead. It was from the solemnity of these whispered vows that the pervasive aura of secrecy, so inextricably linked to the Jesuits, first emerged and then stubbornly clung. Their adversaries, fueled by suspicion and fear, conjured vivid images of hidden subterranean chambers and elaborate oaths sealed with the dark symbolism of blood. Pamphlets, sensational and lurid in their depictions, circulated widely across Europe, painting dramatic pictures of clandestine midnight rituals, daggers ominously crossed upon altars, strange and forbidden invocations recited beneath the echoing arches of vaulted chapels. Protestants, deeply fearful of the burgeoning Jesuit influence and their counter-Reformation efforts, vociferously claimed that these intense vows transformed men into dangerous, insidious agents, veritable spies cloaked deceptively in priestly garments, whose ultimate loyalty resided more with their enigmatic general than with any earthly king or sovereign. Yet those who lived and served within the society itself offered a profoundly different narrative. Their obedience, they asserted, was far from blind or irrational. Rather, it was a meticulously ordered, deliberate, and deeply spiritual commitment, specifically designed and aimed at forging an unparalleled unity of purpose across their global endeavors. One Jesuit might find himself dispatched to the sophisticated imperial courts of Vienna, another to the untamed, verdant jungles of Brazil, and a third to the ancient imperial libraries of China. And yet, despite being widely scattered by vast oceans and sprawling empires, they moved and acted as if connected by invisible, unbreakable cords, each individual meticulously following the same overarching design, each implicitly trusting the unseen, guiding hand of the general who directed their collective spiritual and intellectual enterprise. There remains something profoundly haunting in the sheer, unyielding discipline that characterized the Jesuits. One might easily imagine a diligent Jesuit scholar, quill poised delicately in hand, meticulously copying ancient texts by the flickering light of a solitary candle, when suddenly a letter arrives, its seal marked with the distinctive black wax of the order. Without a moment's hesitation, he would carefully set aside his cherished books, close the shutters of his study, and immediately prepare himself for an arduous journey. Perhaps his destination would be the distant, exotic Indies, or perhaps the icy, unforgiving courts of Russia. No complaint, no murmur of discontent would ever escape his lips. The profound spiritual vow bound him with a tenacity far greater than any physical chains could ever achieve. Yet, he would accept this momentous call to service with a remarkable serenity, even an inner joy, born of his deep faith. Such absolute, unquestioning obedience deeply unsettled and frightened many contemporary observers. Kings, ever watchful of their power, pondered anxiously whether the Jesuit serving in their royal court was truly their loyal servant, or merely an emissary, a messenger of distant Rome. Bishops, guardians of ecclesiastical hierarchy, questioned whether the general's centralized will was perhaps too strong, too absolute, potentially eclipsing their own authority. And for the common people, such an utter, profound surrender of personal will stirred a deep, almost existential unease. What kind of man, they might wonder, willingly gives away his own will so completely until nothing remains but the echoing voice of another? It is precisely at this juncture, where profound questions met pervasive unease, that myth and baseless speculation began to insidiously creep into the narrative. Pamphleteers, eager to capitalize on public anxieties, sensationally claimed that the Jesuit vow of obedience transformed these priests into masters of disguise, adept at slipping across closely guarded borders, cloaking themselves convincingly as unassuming merchants or even hardened soldiers, skillfully bending their considerable talents towards intricate and often dangerous political intrigue. Some individuals went so far as to swear that the Jesuits' sacred oath granted them an uncanny ability to infiltrate conspiracies entirely unseen, asserting that no heretical prince could ever truly feel safe with a Jesuit nearby. Others pushed the boundaries of credulity even further, whispering darkly of a hidden, secret manual, a compendium of instructions so ruthlessly cunning, so utterly manipulative, that even malevolent demons might have recoiled in recognition. Yet, the authentic reality, as is often the case, was considerably quieter, far more subtle in its manifestation. Their profound vow was never intended as a license for clandestine conspiracy or political subterfuge, but rather as an unwavering call to devoted service. And yet, precisely because they obeyed with such astonishing swiftness, because they could seemingly vanish from one remote corner of the world, only to materialize in another, and because their spiritual devotion appeared to transcend the very limits of human capacity, rumor and popular imagination inevitably transformed them into figures larger than life. It painted them, in the popular mind, as enigmatic shadow walkers, as men of two faces, bound by mysterious oaths that the world beyond their order could neither definitively prove nor conclusively dispel. Close your eyes for a moment and endeavor to picture it. A small, ancient chapel, bathed in the profound stillness of midnight, its time-worn stones damp with the accumulated breath of centuries. A young novice kneels, his face half illuminated by the wavering, hesitant glow of a single candle. Before him stands the superior, his eyes steady and penetrating, his voice low and resonant, reciting the sacred words that will irrevocably bind this young man forever. Outside the hallowed walls, the city slumbers peacefully, utterly oblivious that within this quiet, solemn vow lies the potent seed of future global movements, of daring missions that will stretch across vast continents, and of subtle whispers that will ultimately destabilize and unsettle the thrones of mighty kings. For obedience, once freely and fully given, cannot ever truly be reclaimed. The profound weight of the vow lingers far deeper than mere conscious choice, proving immeasurably stronger than any transient fear. And as the last candle sputters and finally extinguishes itself, the novice rises, no longer truly his own, but irrevocably a part of something immeasurably vaster, an invisible army whose formidable strength lay not in the clash of swords or the might of legions, but in the unshakable, silent, absolute power of obedience. And in that profound, lingering silence, the world beyond the chapel's ancient walls would forever ponder what had truly been spoken in those whispered sacred oaths, and to whom did these extraordinary men ultimately truly belong. The binding vow of obedience, contrary to common misconception, did not serve to anchor the Jesuits firmly to the physical confines of Rome. Instead, it acted as a powerful propellant, flinging them outward with an irresistible force, dispersing them like incandescent sparks into the boundless, uncharted expanse of the unknown world. From the bustling, sun-drenched ports of Lisbon and Seville, from the vibrant, creaking docks of Genoa and Venice, their distinctive black-robed figures purposefully stepped aboard stout, often groaning ships, vessels bound for distant horizons, where the existing maps were little more than speculative guesses and imprecise approximations. The stinging salt spray of the ocean clung tenaciously to their austere garments as the great sails cracked and billowed against the relentless wind, propelling them inexorably towards lands whose intricate languages they had never before heard, whose diverse gods and ancient customs were still profoundly cloaked in layers of deep mystery. The global mission of the Society of Jesus commenced with hushed accounts of their groundbreaking endeavors in distant India and Japan, territories where Francis Xavier, a foundational companion of Ignatius of Loyola, valiantly bore the message of Christianity across formidable oceans that claimed countless lives. He courageously navigated tempestuous gales that rent vessels as if they were mere parchment, and typhoons that shrieked with the ferocity of untamed spirits. Nevertheless, upon his arrival in Goa and subsequently in Japan, his correspondence conveyed not trepidation, but profound awe. The melodic resonance of temple chimes drifting through the morning mist, the refined decorum exhibited by the samurai nobility, and the serene stillness of gardens where the very atmosphere seemed to vibrate with the fragrant essence of incense. Although he passed away before realizing his ambition to reach China, his pioneering journeys forged a path that numerous others would dutifully pursue. Within the venerable confines of China, Matteo Ricci adopted the elegant raiment of silk, diligently mastered the nuanced intricacies of the local tongue, and conducted himself with the profound patience characteristic of a seasoned scholar. While many of his predecessors offered only spiritual exhortations, Ricci introduced sophisticated cartography, advanced mathematical principles, and meticulously crafted timepieces that chimed with unparalleled European precision. The curious mandarins, impressed by his intellectual contributions, extended their welcome, inviting him into their magnificent halls, where intricately carved dragons coiled around ancient wooden beams and lanterns cast a soft, luminous glow akin to amber constellations. Ricci's distinguished name would forever be etched within their historical records, revered not as an intrusive foreign presence, but as an essential conduit forging connections between disparate civilizations. Far across the vast expanse of the seas, in the nascent territories of the New World, Jesuit missionaries meticulously established their outposts amidst the untamed wilderness. In the verdant landscapes of Paraguay, they painstakingly constructed settlements where indigenous Guarani communities were instructed in the reading of Latin prayers, even as they continued to play their traditional flutes beneath the sheltering canopy of ancient trees. These specialized communities, known as reductions, burgeoned into self-contained enclaves of spiritual devotion and disciplined order, rigorously defended against the brutal depredations of slavers and the insatiable avarice of the conquistadors. For some observers, these settlements appeared as idyllic havens, villages where the harmonious peal of bells resonated above meticulously carved wooden altars, where no individual suffered the pangs of hunger, and every pair of hands found meaningful employment. Conversely to others, they represented audacious and perilous experiments, an autonomous ecclesiastical entity operating within the broader framework of the Church, a domain governed not by the edicts of kings, but by the singular authority of the Jesuits themselves. This pervasive model of engagement and adaptation replicated itself across numerous continents. In the ancient land of Ethiopia, they engaged in theological discourse with venerable priests whose churches had endured for centuries, intricately hewn directly from solid rock. In the vibrant tapestry of India, they respectfully knelt before powerful rulers ensconced in opulent golden palaces, their Latin supplications harmonizing with the age-old resonance of Sanskrit chants. In the unforgiving vastness of Canada, they laboriously trekked through relentless snow and biting ice, their breath materializing as frozen plumes in the frigid air as they diligently carried their spiritual doctrine into the remote villages inhabited by the Huron and Iroquois peoples. Some of these devoted individuals met a martyr's fate, bound to stakes, their final desperate cries echoing hauntingly across the desolate frozen rivers. Yet, their compelling narratives, meticulously documented in personal diaries and poignant letters, served as a profound wellspring of inspiration, compelling countless others to embrace the same perilous calling. What particularly captivated their adversaries was not merely the expansive reach of their influence, but rather their extraordinary capacity for adaptation. Wherever their missions led them, Jesuits meticulously adopted the local attire, fluently conversed in the indigenous languages of the land, and assiduously immersed themselves in the native customs until they appeared less like foreign interlopers and more like authentic reflections of the very people they earnestly sought to convert. This remarkable, almost chameleon-like attribute invariably engendered profound suspicion. Were these individuals genuinely devoted missionaries? Or were they cunning spies cloaked in the guise of priestly humility, surreptitiously acquiring the closely guarded secrets of kingdoms to relay back to the powerful corridors of Rome? Monarchs across Europe were seized by trepidation at such a notion. A Jesuit stationed within their court might serve as a confessor, attentively receiving whispered confessions of sin within the hushed sanctity of a chapel. However, he might also be a brilliant mathematician meticulously charting novel trade routes, or a shrewd diplomat discreetly conveying encrypted dispatches across international boundaries. The precise demarcation between sacred mission and clandestine espionage became increasingly indistinct in the minds of these apprehensive rulers, thereby fueling the pervasive myth of an intricate, unseen network so vast and pervasive that no terrestrial empire could ever hope to fully contain its reach. And yet, for the Jesuits themselves, their arduous journey was far less about intricate political machinations and considerably more about profound spiritual capitulation. Each perilous sea voyage constituted an unequivocal act of faith. Every new horizon served as a poignant reminder of their solemn vow to proceed obediently wherever their superiors commanded them to go. Some perished anonymously, swallowed by the impenetrable depths of dense jungles or the merciless expanse of the open seas. Others, however, bequeathed enduring legacies, vast libraries, esteemed educational institutions, and meticulous translations that persevered for centuries beyond their own mortal existence. Envision, if you will, this tableau. A Jesuit vessel gracefully approaches a distant coastline as dawn breaks, its heavy sails glistening with morning dew, the air thick with the pungent aroma of salt and tar. On the weathered deck, a priest, clad in a well-worn black cassock, tightly clutches a crucifix in one hand and a tattered notebook in the other. Ahead, the indistinct silhouette of an entirely new world gradually emerges. A dense jungle, a towering mountain range, or perhaps the elegant spire of a majestic palace. Behind him, the ceaseless murmur of the ocean seems to whisper of the homeland he will undoubtedly never again behold. He bows his head in silent contemplation, inhales the invigorating, salt-laden air, and resolutely steps forward to the annals of history. A solitary figure, bearing the immense weight of an empire of faith upon his shoulders, and in the gentle hush of the waves lapping against the hull, it almost appears as though the very sea itself echoes his sacred pledge back to him. Obedience, obedience, obedience. While their intrepid vessels conveyed them across vast oceans to distant shores, it was frequently within the opulent, gilded chambers closer to their European homelands that the Jesuits wielded their most discreet, yet profoundly incisive influence. Behind sumptuous velvet draperies and within the intimate glow of candlelight-illuminated rooms, they seamlessly transitioned into roles as trusted confessors, sagacious counselors, and intimate confidants to monarchs, queens, and princes whose closely guarded secrets possessed the immense power to irrevocably alter the destiny of entire nations. To cross the threshold into a throne room was to enter a magnificent yet treacherous theater of power. And the Jesuits, with remarkable skill, learned to perform their crucial roles with a carefully calibrated humility, a subtly veiled intellectual acuity, and an unshakable composure. Their influence typically commenced with hushed intimations. A reigning monarch, grappling with matters of profound conscience, would discreetly seek spiritual guidance, summoning a Jesuit whose reputation for unwavering discipline and absolute discretion had long preceded him. Cloaked in his unassuming black habit, the priest would reverently kneel beside the royal chair, attentively listening as the ruler unburdened himself of transgressions too weighty and sensitive to be articulated aloud to any courtier. The Jesuit, therefore, gained privileged insight into betrayals, ambitious schemes, financial obligations, and impending conflicts long before such matters were formally codified into law or etched into international treaties. His counsel, though fundamentally shaped by theological principles, carried the subtle yet potent force of profound influence, deftly guiding critical decisions that possess the capacity to sway the very balance of entire kingdoms. In the illustrious court of France, they became indispensable spiritual mentors to the formidable Bourbon dynasty. King Louis XIV, in particular, found in them confessors who skillfully reconciled deep piety with astute political acumen. A softly whispered absolution, granted in the sanctity of the confessional, could significantly bolster a king's resolve and mental fortitude. A judicious suggestion, artfully cloaked in scriptural wisdom, could subtly steer the crown towards policies that the Jesuits deemed morally righteous. At the magnificent Palace of Versailles, amidst its dazzling mirrored galleries and meticulously sculpted gardens designed to impose order upon nature itself, their dark robes seemed almost to vanish, appearing as fleeting shadows moving softly between the chapels and private chambers, whispering their counsel into the receptive ears of princes. In the fervent realm of Spain, their profound influence permeated even deeper layers of society. The staunchly Catholic Habsburg monarchs regarded the Jesuits as vigilant guardians of Catholic orthodoxy during an era when the tumultuous winds of Protestantism threatened to sweep across the entirety of Europe. They undertook the crucial responsibility of educating the royal offspring, meticulously shaping the impressionable minds that were destined to one day assume regal thrones. In the softly illuminated candlelight classrooms of grand palaces, young heirs not only mastered their Latin grammar, but also absorbed the distinctive Jesuit worldview, indelibly imprinted upon their burgeoning intellects, like ink seeping into precious parchment. However, it was not exclusively within Catholic courts that their presence was felt. In Protestant England, persistent rumors swirled of Jesuit spies purportedly lurking in the shadows, cunningly disguised as unassuming merchants or private tutors, systematically infiltrating the noble households of the realm. To a significant portion of the English populace, the very term Jesuit became inextricably linked with that of an intriguer, a shadowy figure enshrouded in an aura of conspiracy, believed to be manipulating unseen strings that possessed the power to unravel the very fabric of the kingdom itself. Although these sensational tales were frequently born of profound fear and rampant exaggeration, they nevertheless nourished the pervasive myth of a clandestine network so extraordinarily secretive that no monarch or parliamentary body could ever hope to fully safeguard against its insidious machinations. The inherent duality of the Jesuits simultaneously captivated and profoundly terrified rulers. They were undeniably devout men of prayer, capable of kneeling for extended hours in profound silence. Yet they were equally formidable men of action, wielding their words with the precision and impact of weapons, moving with almost invisible discretion within the intricate game of international diplomacy. Where other power brokers engaged in negotiations with tangible gold, the Jesuits engaged in a more profound bargaining with the very souls of individuals, offering absolution, spiritual solace, or the terrifying prospect of eternal damnation as currencies far more potent and influential than mere coin. At certain junctures, their influence expanded to such an astonishing degree that even the popes themselves began to experience unease. For if a Jesuit confessor possessed the power to sway the will of a king, could he not also subtly shift the delicate balance of power between the venerable authority of Rome and the secular sovereignty of the crown? If a single, softly whispered suggestion possessed the capacity to tip the scales of an international treaty, then was the formidable power of the so-called Black Pope not, in essence, beginning to rival that of the White Pope himself? Imagine, for a moment, the profound hush that descends upon a royal chapel at the stroke of midnight. Heavy tapestries adorn the ancient walls, effectively muffling the faint crackle of flickering torches. A king kneels at the communion rail, his crown respectfully set aside, his voice barely audible, laden with sins too burdensome to bear in isolation. Beside him, a Jesuit leans in closely, his shadow stretching long and dark across the polished marble floors. He listens intently, utterly motionless, then whispers a response, words as soft and ephemeral as smoke, yet as weighty and immutable as stone. The king slowly rises, visibly transformed, his resolve strengthened, his heart unburdened, and his mind sharpened with renewed clarity. The Jesuit then recedes back into the enveloping shadows, his pivotal work unseen by the world, yet indelibly etched upon the course of history. And so, this enduring pattern of influence persisted, court after court, generation after generation. The Jesuits positioned themselves not as monarchs themselves, but rather as those who skillfully bent the ears of monarchs, gently guiding the hands that clutched royal scepters and wielded the pens that affixed signatures to momentous treaties. They were not kings in their own right, yet at times, in profound silence, they meticulously shaped the very destiny of kings. It was within these echoing chambers of power that the pervasive myth of the Black Pope gained formidable traction. For if the superior general possessed the authority to direct Jesuits across vast oceans, he could, by extension, also orchestrate the actions of those who whispered their counsel into the receptive ears of crowned heads. And if crowns could be subtly swayed, then entire empires could be nudged, ever so imperceptibly, toward trajectories that perhaps only the Jesuits themselves could fully comprehend. In the profound stillness of the night, within courts resplendent with gilding and rigorously guarded, the Jesuits intricately wove their influence like a delicate yet immensely strong web, so fine it remained unseen, yet so robust that kingdoms themselves trembled upon its intricate threads. This particular appellation was never intended to be an official designation. It was neither formally codified into canon law, nor majestically carved into the gleaming marble of Vatican halls. And yet, whispered conspiratorially in hushed corridors, muttered under breath in bustling taverns, and defiantly printed in forbidden pamphlets, one name clung with tenacious persistence to the superior general of the Society of Jesus, the Black Pope. This moniker was not merely a reference to his customary attire. Indeed, all Jesuits were uniformly clad in black, their simple cassocks presenting a stark visual contrast against the opulent gold vestments of bishops and the pristine white robes of the papacy. In the commanding figure of the superior general, however, the global stage perceived an individual whose authority appeared to stand in direct rivalry with that of the Roman pontiff himself. While the visible pope, adorned in white vestments, held sway from the hallowed throne of St. Peter with overt ceremony and public display, the enigmatic Black Pope quietly orchestrated the obedience of an unseen yet formidable spiritual legion. His formidable influence was not celebrated in grand public processions or sung in solemn hymns, but rather transmitted through letters carefully sealed with wax, in cryptic missives discreetly conveyed across national frontiers, and through hushed directives imparted within the sacred confines of confessionals and the learned atmosphere of classrooms. From the very genesis of their order, members of the Society of Jesus solemnly pledged their fealty not solely to the Pope residing in Rome, but also to their superior general, whose pronouncements possessed the unwavering force of law. This overarching authority stretched across vast continents, extending its reach to dedicated missionaries toiling in distant China, to astute confessors advising in the salons of Paris, and to intrepid explorers charting new territories in the wilds of Brazil. Indeed, it was widely believed that with a singular, decisive command, the Black Pope possessed the capacity to fundamentally alter the destinies of entire kingdoms, owing to the strategic placement of his devoted men alongside monarchs and powerful cardinals alike. This perception of the Jesuit leader grew considerably more ominous when adversaries of the society began to propagate unsettling narratives concerning their sacred vows. Some sensational claims asserted that the Jesuit pledge of obedience was so utterly absolute that the superior general could issue an imperative for a man to traverse vast oceans, to to clandestinely infiltrate royal courts, or even to embrace a silent death for the cause, and that such an individual would comply without the slightest hesitation or query. Other voices vehemently insisted that the Black Pope was a master architect of conspiracies, covertly directing assassinations, subtly fanning the flames of revolt, and meticulously weaving intricate webs of intrigue to consolidate and expand his order's pervasive dominion. The underlying reality was admittedly more ambiguous, imbued with greater complexity and subtle distinctions. Yet the potent legend firmly took root in the popular imagination. Within clandestine pamphlets surreptitiously circulated throughout Protestant Europe, crude yet vivid woodcuts frequently depicted a shadowy, dark-robed pope positioned behind the resplendent papal throne, his hand resting with suggestive intent upon the white pope's shoulder, guiding him as if he were a mere puppet. In these inflammatory narratives, it was not the legitimate successor of St. Peter who truly governed Rome, but rather a clandestine general who whispered his clandestine commands through the impenetrable veil of absolute obedience. And yet, within the very heart of Rome itself, the Black Pope did not reside within opulent, gilded palaces, but rather occupied modest, unassuming quarters situated in close proximity to the Gesù, which served as the venerable mother church of the Jesuit order. His personal chambers were remarkably austere, a sturdy desk laden with an immense volume of incoming and outgoing correspondence, a simple crucifix adorning the wall, and a well-worn chair where he received his various visitors. Nevertheless, from this remarkably unpretentious room, a ceaseless torrent of instructions emanated, flowing outward in all conceivable directions, much like powerful rivers gushing forth from a singular, abundant spring. One might easily envision him there at the nascent hours of dawn, the crisp air still carrying the cool remnants of the fading night. A solitary candle flickers low, its molten wax slowly dripping onto the aged wooden surface of his desk. Before him lay a vast assortment of letters, meticulously penned in the often spidery handwriting of missionaries, confessors, and esteemed professors from distant Asia, the burgeoning Americas, and the Old World nations of Europe. He would diligently peruse accounts of triumphant conversions and disheartening setbacks, of powerful kings who seemed to waver dangerously towards heresy, and of intrepid explorers who meticulously mapped intricate river systems that might one day serve as conduits to carry the Christian faith deeper into uncharted inland territories. He would pause reflectively, then meticulously compose his responses in precise, careful Latin. His meticulously chosen words carried the dual weight of both solemn blessing and unyielding command. Each of these carefully sealed letters thus became an essential, intricate thread woven into the expansive, often unseen, and subtly influential tapestry of Jesuit power and reach. However, this pervasive influence was not universally embraced or welcomed. Even the popes themselves occasionally exhibited clear signs of irritation at the notion that another figure could command such profound and unwavering devotion. Monarchs in their private chambers would frequently murmur in frustration, expressing their disquiet that their Jesuit confessors owed their ultimate allegiance not to the crown they served, but to a distant and unseen general residing in Rome. And it was precisely within this simmering tension that the enigmatic aura surrounding the Black Pope only grew more profound and captivating. By the advent of the 17th century, the appellation Black Pope had become almost universally employed, sometimes uttered with profound awe, yet more frequently with palpable fear. To some devout adherents, the Black Pope represented the steadfast guardian of orthodox doctrine, embodying the unyielding steel backbone of the Catholic Church against the formidable onslaught of Protestant and pagan tides. To others, however, he was perceived as the shadowy, hidden hand operating behind insidious plots and ruthless purges, a dark and formidable figure whose pervasive power seemed to eclipse that of the Holy Father himself. And so the world began to speak of two distinct popes: the White Pope, who was resplendent in gold and stood bathed in the full light of public view, and the Black Pope, who was cloaked in shadow and commanded his vast network through silent, discreet directives. Together, they appeared to form a dual axis of formidable power, one overtly visible and ceremonial, the other subtly invisible yet profoundly influential, with both deemed utterly indispensable to the very shape and enduring structure of Christendom. The profound myth surrounding the Black Pope transcended mere nomenclature. It represented a fundamental question that persistently troubled and haunted the grand palaces and august parliaments of Europe alike. Who truly governs Rome? The Jesuits had initially infiltrated the royal courts of Europe with remarkably little fanfare or overt display, their unassuming black cassocks blending almost seamlessly into the somber shadows of private chapels and hushed antechambers. Yet, astonishingly, within the span of a single generation, they had become utterly indispensable to the reigning monarchs. They served in multifarious roles as trusted confessors, esteemed educators, and sagacious advisors. They meticulously tutored the sons of powerful princes, subtly whispered counsel into the ears of influential queens, and sat with quiet discernment in the hallowed chambers of royal councils, perpetually listening, absorbing vital information, and patiently waiting for the opportune moment. Kings, undoubtedly, highly valued their acute intelligence, their profound learning, and their remarkable ability to subtly persuade. However, with each hushed confession shared and every meticulously sealed letter dispatched to Rome, a growing, unsettling unease began to take root within the royal psyche. One might vividly imagine the resplendent, gilded court of France, where the soft glow of myriad candles flickered within ornate crystal chandeliers. The reigning monarch kneels reverently in his private chapel, softly murmuring his sins into the attentive ear of his Jesuit confessor. Yet, despite the intimacy of the moment, the king cannot help but be plagued by a persistent, nagging question. Does this man truly serve me, or is his ultimate loyalty pledged to another unseen master? The implicit answer to this profound question remained consistently the same. The Jesuits' primary allegiance was always owed first to the Church, and subsequently to his superior general. The pervasive authority of the Black Pope extended like invisible yet unbreakable chains, effectively binding the very conscience of kings to a formidable figure whom they had never personally encountered. In the court of Spain, a similar undercurrent of tension visibly bristled. Jesuits were entrusted with the vital task of educating the heirs of the powerful Habsburg dynasty, meticulously shaping the minds that would one day govern vast empires. They offered counsel not as sycophantic flatterers, but as men who appeared to wield their profound knowledge of history, philosophy, and theology as potent intellectual weapons. They subtly guided monarchs towards predetermined decisions, all while maintaining an outward demeanor of humble and devoted service. For a reigning king, This experience was akin to engaging in a complex game of chess with an opponent who already possessed foreknowledge of every single move, right up to the final checkmate. Not all European rulers, however, were prepared to tolerate such an arrangement. Elizabeth I of England, for instance, regarded Jesuits as treacherous daggers in the dark, perceiving their divided loyalty as exceedingly dangerous within a kingdom that had decisively embraced Protestantism. She unequivocally branded them as traitors, as clandestine agents of Rome cloaked deceptively in priestly robes. Her trusted ministers frequently whispered of dark assassins, intricate conspiracies, and sinister plots designed to forcibly unseat her from the throne. Across the breadth of Europe, Protestant pamphlets graphically depicted Jesuits as insidious serpents, slyly slithering into royal courts, their distinctive black robes trailing behind them like ominous shadows of impending death. Even within traditionally Catholic realms, a deep-seated suspicion continued to fester and grow. France, Spain, and Portugal, each in their turn, would eventually proceed to expel the Jesuits from their territories. This drastic action was not taken due to any perceived lack of their religious devotion, but rather because their respective monarchs increasingly feared the prospect of being governed from behind an invisible, impenetrable veil of unseen authority. The fundamental question lingered. How could a sovereign king truly trust a counselor whose very soul and ultimate allegiance belonged irrevocably to another distant figure? This pervasive tension reached its critical zenith during moments of violent and often unsubstantiated accusation. When King Henry IV of France was tragically assassinated in 1610, whispers of Jesuit involvement spread like an uncontrollable wildfire across the continent. Although no Jesuit blade actually struck the king, persistent rumors insisted that their subtle counsel had, in fact, paved the way for the regicide. When various conspiracies brewed in England, Jesuit names were frequently inscribed in ink across official indictments, regardless of their actual guilt or innocence. And each such rumor only served to further strengthen the enduring myth that the Black Pope's formidable reach extended not merely into the inner sanctums of royal courts, but indeed into the very bloodstream of European politics itself. The Jesuits, naturally, vigorously denied all such charges, vehemently asserting their unwavering loyalty, not their supposed subversive intent. They steadfastly offered their extensive network of knowledge and influence to serve both the crown and the church. And yet, despite their fervent denials, the profound fear lingered. For rulers who had historically commanded vast armies and wielded tangible power, it was deeply unsettling to confront an enigmatic adversary that fought its battles with the subtle tools of schools, powerful pulpits, and the silent, intimate confessionals. Consider the private, opulent rooms of Versailles. Behind rich silk draperies, Louis XIV, the Sun King, confers in hushed tones with his Jesuit confessor. The king, whose immense authority stretched like the very sun across the entirety of Europe, found himself, on occasion, subtly bending to the gentle yet undeniably firm guidance of a man clad in a simple black robe. Despite all his unparalleled pomp and circumstance, the king's conscience was not entirely his own domain, and he was keenly aware of this profound reality. Thus, the legend only deepened, asserting that the Black Pope, through his vast and silent network of confessors, wielded far greater power over kings than any crown or sword could ever conceivably command. Monarchs commanded vast armies and wielded visible power, Jesuits, conversely, commanded souls and subtly shaped consciences. Stum. And within that invisible yet fiercely contested battlefield, kings frequently found themselves remarkably vulnerable, subject to whispers and guidance that penetrated and reached far beyond the confines of their gilded thrones. By the 17th century, this underlying fear had become ubiquitous. In the grand dining halls and rustic hunting lodges, within the solemn chambers of parliaments and the lavish rooms of palaces, men frequently muttered the same anxious thought. If the Jesuits primarily serve the Black Pope above all other allegiances, then who truly governs the rulers of Christendom? The prevailing sentiment began to shift, initially with hushed murmurs, then escalating into overt public proclamations. By the middle of the 17th century, the Jesuits, who had once been enthusiastically welcomed into courts and kingdoms as valiant saviors of the faith, were increasingly being cast out and denounced as insidious enemies in disguise. Their burgeoning strength had grown too overtly visible. Their network of schools had multiplied exponentially. Their confessors whispered counsel far too intimately close to the centers of power, and their unswerving loyalty to the Black Pope unsettled even the most devout Catholic monarchs. The fundamental question was no longer about the value or quality of their service, but rather about the sheer, undeniable extent of their pervasive reach. In Portugal, the royal court took the decisive first step. The Jesuits had played a significant role in expanding Portugal's vast empire, guiding their dedicated missionaries to far-flung lands such as Brazil, Africa, and Asia. Yet, this very success came with a significant and unforeseen cost. The Portuguese crown began to discover that Jesuit missions, in certain instances, operated more like autonomous, independent states rather than mere colonial outposts subservient to the empire. Specifically in Brazil, the Jesuits had actively shielded indigenous peoples from the brutal practice of enslavement, adamantly insisting that these individuals were children of God, and therefore not mere commodities to be exploited by the empire. For the colonial settlers, who desperately sought a cheap labor force, this stance was utterly intolerable. For the court in Lisbon, it amounted to rebellion in all but name. Consequently, the crown officially declared the Jesuits to be subversive, and in the cold, unyielding language of royal decrees, their immediate banishment was formally ordered. Following Lisbon's decisive example, suspicion of the society rapidly spread throughout Europe. In France, the powerful Parliament of Paris took careful note of the Jesuits' ever-increasing influence. Pamphlets began to accuse the society of actively fostering sedition, of breeding insidious conspiracies within the intimate confines of confessionals. Their vocal critics vehemently claimed that the Jesuits sought to bend the will of the French monarchy to the ultimate dictates of Rome. Even as powerful monarchs, including the illustrious Louis XIV of France, continued to rely upon the Society of Jesus for spiritual guidance and intellectual counsel through their trusted confessors, an insidious undercurrent of skepticism and apprehension began to take root within the European consciousness. Within the fiercely independent maritime Republic of Venice, the banishment of the Jesuit order unfolded with startling rapidity and considerable public spectacle. This proud city-state, ever vigilant over its autonomy, perceived the Jesuits as encroaching upon matters considered sacrosanct to its sovereign authority. Their well-established reputation for unwavering allegiance to the superior general, colloquially known as the Black Pope, stood in stark contrast to the superior general's unwavering allegiance to the superior general opposition to the deeply ingrained sense of Venetian self-determination. Consequently, in the tumultuous year of 1606, amidst a significant diplomatic confrontation between Venice and Pope Paul V, the Jesuits were unequivocally commanded to depart the historic lagoons of the Republic. The exodus of the society proved to be a profoundly somber affair. Small watercraft, laden with the banished priests and their scholarly texts, glided almost imperceptibly through the atmospheric, mist-shrouded canals of the city. Their once thriving spiritual and educational endeavors were not forsaken due to theological dissent or accusations of heterodoxy, but rather succumbed to the intricate and often ruthless machinations of political power. This precedent of expulsion, a stark testament to the burgeoning tensions, soon found echoes and replication throughout the diverse political landscapes of the European continent. From absolute monarchs presiding over vast kingdoms to powerful parliamentary bodies, from influential dukedoms to self-governing republics, a pervasive apprehension took hold regarding the enigmatic influence of an organization that seemed to defy conventional oversight or direct governmental command. The underlying motivations for these expulsions were multifaceted. On occasion, they assumed a theological guise, artfully presented in fervent sermons that decried the supposed propagation of perilous doctrines and unorthodox interpretations. At other junctures, the impelling factors were distinctly economic, manifesting in the profound indignation of powerful merchants and affluent landowners who bristled at the Jesuits' impassioned advocacy for the rights and welfare of indigenous populations in distant colonial territories. However, with remarkable frequency, the root causes were undeniably political in nature. No sovereign ruler, regardless of their dominion's size or strength, could long countenance the existence of an extensive, highly disciplined network of individuals whose ultimate fealty was pledged not to the crown or the state, but to an external, spiritual authority. Despite the concerted efforts to eradicate their presence, each decree of banishment, paradoxically, appeared to fall short of its intended objective. With a spectral resilience, the Jesuits consistently re-emerged, much like fleeting shadows that dissipate in one place only to materialize elsewhere. When one royal court decreed their expulsion, another, perhaps seeking their intellectual prowess or missionary zeal, extended an invitation for their services. A mission forcibly dismantled in one region often saw its spirit and purpose blossom anew in a far-flung corner of the globe. Thus, their enforced absence from the canals of Venice did not in the least diminish their burgeoning influence in the distant lands of Poland, nor did their dramatic exile from Portugal succeed in extinguishing their formidable strength and evangelical endeavors across the vast continent of Asia. They proved to be an elusive force, akin to water that perpetually slips through one's grasp, seemingly impervious to conventional containment. Yet these very acts of prescription inadvertently served another, more profound purpose. They actively fueled the burgeoning legend surrounding the society. Among the populace of Europe, hushed murmurs and escalating whispers began to circulate. The prevailing sentiment suggested that if powerful monarchs held such a deep-seated fear of the Jesuits, then surely their influence and clandestine power must transcend even royal authority. If entire nations deemed it necessary to cast them out, The unspoken implication was that the Jesuits had perhaps uncovered or become privy to profound secrets that no temporal ruler possessed the courage or capacity to confront. Consequently, the traditional image of the Jesuit as merely a devout man of the cloth, dedicated to spiritual instruction and pastoral care, began to transmute, blurring into a far more sinister and potentially perilous perception. And at the very nexus of this escalating mystique, the shadowy, unseen hand of the Black Pope, the superior general of the society, was imagined to preside, perpetually guiding, subtly correcting, and patiently awaiting the opportune moment for his next strategic maneuver. Envision, if one can, a frigid, moonless night descending upon the cobblestone streets of Lisbon. The thoroughfares were illuminated by the flickering glow of numerous torches, as solemn, black-robed Jesuits proceeded in an eerie silence towards the bustling docks. The city's inhabitants observed the procession with a palpable sense of unease and hushed anticipation. Among the onlookers, some shed tears of genuine sorrow for the departure of these spiritual leaders, while others, fueled by suspicion or resentment, openly uttered imprecations and curses. The vessels, their lanterns casting an ephemeral dancing light upon the restless waves, gradually pulled away from the quayside, bearing away individuals who had, through their profound influence, helped to shape the destinies of burgeoning empires and the very fabric of countless personal confessions. Nevertheless, as the ship's sails gradually receded and finally disappeared into the inky expanse of the dark Atlantic horizon, a profound conviction settled upon many. This was not a definitive conclusion, but merely the prelude to an even more turbulent period. It seemed that with each successive banishment, the Society of Jesus inexplicably re-emerged with renewed vigor and enhanced influence. And with every such resurgence, the enigmatic legend of their concealed power grew more entrenched, reaching such a pervasive level that even reigning monarchs began to question the true nature of their expulsions, pondering whether genuine exile was ever achieved, or if the elusive Black Pope had merely retreated into yet another strategic shadow, patiently biding his time for a dramatic re-emergence. As the 18th century dawned and progressed, the Society of Jesus ceased to exist solely within the illuminated realm of overt piety and scholastic dedication. Instead, their presence had subtly transitioned, receding into the ambiguous half-light of pervasive rumor and escalating suspicion. Throughout the continent of Europe, prolific pamphleteers and impassioned preachers began to portray them not merely as esteemed educators and spiritual confessors, but rather as cunning manipulators, skillfully orchestrating events from behind the scenes, pulling unseen strings with masterful precision. The mere appellation Jesuit consequently began to acquire an almost tangible burden of deep-seated suspicion, its syllables whispered surreptitiously in the bustling marketplaces, murmured in the refined confines of aristocratic salons, boldly printed in the anonymous pages of inflammatory broadsheets, and disseminated from one eager hand to another like some clandestine, forbidden text. The litany of accusations leveled against them proved to be as diverse in their nature as they were profoundly ominous in their implications. Certain detractors asserted that the Jesuits were the hidden masterminds behind intricate plots to assassinate reigning monarchs. Others vehemently accused them of surreptitiously guiding popular revolutions, of meticulously embedding secret codes within their weighty theological treatises, and of perverting the sacred institution of the confessional, transforming it from a conduit for spiritual absolution into a sophisticated apparatus for gathering sensitive intelligence. Indeed, a significant faction of their critics adamantly maintained that the society's intricate network extended its tendrils into virtually every conceivable corner of Europe and even far beyond, effectively constituting an invisible, formidable empire that boldly rivaled the established power and authority of the monarchies themselves. In the intellectual epicenters like Paris, the burgeoning coffeehouses transformed into vibrant hotbeds of intense speculation and fervent debate. The influential philosophers of the Enlightenment, who harbored a deep-seated skepticism toward all forms of clerical authority, specifically singled out the Jesuits, branding them as the most formidable and insidious threat among all religious orders. The acerbic wit of Voltaire, for instance, frequently sneered at their perceived cunning and manipulative tactics, while other prominent thinkers openly denounced them as the insidious architects of a tyranny cunningly disguised beneath a veneer of profound piety. For the growing ranks of skeptics and freethinkers, the enigmatic figure of the Black Pope crystallized into a potent symbol embodying everything they fundamentally disdained, an elusive, unseen sovereign, not adorned in the traditional resplendent purple robes of the papacy, but rather cloaked in the austere black vestments of his order, silently issuing his commands from the impenetrable depths of the shadows. The myriad conspiracy narratives found fertile ground and potent sustenance in the society's inherent penchant for discretion and its tightly guarded internal operations. Their rigorous discipline, the unwavering oaths of obedience taken by their members, and the secluded nature of their houses of study and formation all served to ignite already feverish imaginations, providing ample fuel for the burgeoning flames of suspicion and elaborate theorizing. Wild tales began to circulate, asserting that the Jesuits had so thoroughly infiltrated the highest echelons of European royal courts that virtually no significant decision of state could be deliberated or enacted without their subtle, influential whisper guiding the process. Furthermore, certain accusers boldly claimed that the Jesuits exerted an almost absolute control over the intricate flow of wealth, subtly directing the operations of prominent banks and influential merchants through a sophisticated network of coded correspondence. Others, equally convinced, solemnly swore that the society possessed ancient, meticulously detailed maps, meticulously charting undiscovered routes to vast, hidden treasures concealed within the unexplored reaches of the New World. Treasures deliberately withheld from reigning monarchs for the exclusive furtherance of their own enigmatic designs. Even in the distant Americas, their renowned reductions, those meticulously constructed and carefully managed settlements designed for the spiritual and social upliftment of indigenous converts, were maliciously depicted by their adversaries as impregnable fortresses. Critics adamantly insisted that the Jesuits were illicitly accumulating vast quantities of wealth and secretly training formidable armies, all in preparation for the audacious endeavor of carving out an independent kingdom of their own amidst the sprawling forests and winding rivers of the continent. While the underlying reality of their activities was undoubtedly far more intricate and nuanced than these sensationalized portrayals, the compelling power of the myth proved utterly irresistible. Jesuit priests, portrayed as intellectually formidable and armed with esoteric knowledge, steadfastly defending clandestine realms from the perceived encroachments of both indigenous populations and European colonial rulers alike. Intriguingly, even within the hallowed confines of the Catholic Church itself, a pervasive undercurrent of suspicion deepened. Esteemed cardinals were heard to murmur discreetly about supposed Jesuit plots unfolding within papal conclaves, and of their subtle yet potent influence being exerted upon the outcomes of papal elections. A haunting question began to circulate. Did the Black Pope, though physically present in Rome yet symbolically removed from the actual papal throne, wield a power of veto that surpassed the collective votes of the College of Cardinals? A significant number of individuals, deeply swayed by these narratives, solemnly affirmed this to be the undeniable truth. Within the hushed solemnity of locked chapels, where only the most guarded confidences were exchanged, priests themselves were heard to whisper chilling rumors of Jesuits subtly, yet definitively, steering the very spiritual essence and doctrinal direction of Catholicism towards their own undisclosed and enigmatic objectives. The enduring power of these pervasive conspiracy theories resided not in their verifiable substantiation or empirical proof, but rather in their relentless, unwavering persistence. Each successive banishment, every public controversy that ensnared the order, and indeed, every sudden elevation of a Jesuit to a position of significant prominence, served only to reinforce and validate the deeply ingrained suspicions harbored by their numerous detractors. The rhetorical questions that inevitably arose seemed to confirm the worst. Were they not, after all, expelled from sovereign kingdoms precisely because their influence had become unduly expansive, their reach dangerously overextended? And if, against all odds, they managed to return, was it not irrefutable evidence that their elusive, unseen hand continued to exert its subtle dominion within the very corridors of power? Envision for a moment an intimate candlelight salon in the imperial city of Vienna, where elegantly attired aristocrats recline in plush velvet chairs, their attention captivated as a sensationalist pamphlet is read aloud. The inflammatory text boldly accused the Jesuits of orchestrating a vast, clandestine conspiracy aimed at systematically installing their own chosen candidates upon every single throne across the European continent. While a few individuals might have initially scoffed at the perceived absurdity of such an audacious claim, the unsettling notion itself remained indelibly etched in their memories. In the ensuing silence, once the polite laughter had dissipated, a singular, disquieting question inevitably lingered in the contemplative mind of each distinguished guest. What if, against all rational judgment, this seemingly outlandish accusation held a kernel of truth? Indeed, as the shadows of night deepened across the vast expanse of the European continent, one undeniable truth crystallized with stark clarity, irrespective of their actual innocence or culpability. The Jesuits had become inextricably entwined with the pervasive concept of conspiracy. And the enigmatic figure of the Black Pope, though perpetually unseen by the ordinary populace, assumed a symbolic stature that loomed even larger than that of reigning kings or the Roman pontiffs in the collective imagination of Europe, a spectral presence whose very existence constituted an enduring, dark, and ultimately unanswerable enigma. By the middle of the 18th century, the incessant whispers and speculative murmurs had metastasized, swelling into a force far more potent and perilous than mere rumor. Monarchs and consorts, who had for generations relied heavily upon Jesuit confessors and trusted advisors for spiritual guidance and political counsel, now began to perceive these once loyal servants not as indispensable allies, but rather as formidable rivals whose burgeoning influence was to be genuinely feared. Consequently, the ruling monarchs of Bourbon Spain, France, and Portugal, their trust in the Society of Jesus irrevocably eroded, began, one after another, to systematically excise the order from their domains. Much like a surgeon meticulously amputates a limb deemed dangerously infected with a hidden insidious poison. In the bustling capital of Lisbon, under the assertive administration of the powerful Marquis of Pombal, the Jesuits found themselves facing grave accusations of inciting rebellion within the vast colonial territory of Brazil and of actively conspiring against the authority of the Portuguese crown. In swift and decisive action, their esteemed colleges were summarily shuttered, their extensive libraries confiscated, and their priests forcibly removed from their sacred pulpits, often with considerable public humiliation. Across the Pyrenees in Madrid, King Charles III, acting with calculated stealth, issued his decisive decrees in the profound stillness of the dead of night. Imperial soldiers, moving with chilling efficiency, stormed Jesuit houses while the unsuspecting city lay slumbering. Priests were abruptly roused from their sleep by the harsh glare of torchlight, afforded no opportunity whatsoever to mount a defense or even to comprehend their sudden fate, and were then marched away in a disquieting, enforced silence. Throughout the expansive French kingdom, King Louis XV, bowing to the relentless pressure exerted by his influential ministers, similarly sanctioned their banishment, a decision made despite the unwavering loyalty the Society had demonstrably shown him in previous decades. The Society of Jesus, an organization that had wielded such immense power and intellectual sway only a few decades prior, now appeared to dissolve and vanish almost entirely overnight, leaving behind a profound void. Vessels were dispatched to ferry entire communities of Jesuits into a forced and often desolate exile, transporting them to the relative sanctuary of papal lands, to the rugged island of Corsica, or to the remote, forgotten edges of vast empires, where the explicit hope was that they would simply fade into obscurity and be quietly forgotten by history. Their once thriving schools now stood desolate and vacant. Their beautiful chapels lay abandoned, and their revered names were systematically subjected to public defamation, mercilessly dragged through the mire of inflammatory political pamphlets. And then, the ultimate decisive decree arrived, one that irrevocably sealed their fate. In the pivotal year of 1773, Pope Clement XIV, succumbing to the immense and unrelenting pressure exerted by the most powerful European monarchs, issued a momentous papal bull that formally and completely dissolved the Society of Jesus itself. The symbolic chair of the Black Pope now stood vacant, an emblem of the order's disarray. The venerable seal of the Society was ceremonially broken, signifying its formal cessation. In the eternal city of Rome, their magnificent principal church, the Gesù, remained standing, a silent monument, but the devoted men who had once filled its pews were now scattered to the four winds. Some openly wept in despair, while others quietly receded into the anonymity of ordinary parish work. Still others, fueled by an enduring commitment, continued their scholarly teaching and spiritual guidance in clandestine secrecy. For a period, it genuinely appeared as though the Jesuits had been utterly expunged, not merely from their positions of influence and authority, but almost entirely from the collective memory of Europe. Nevertheless, The profound silence that descended upon their former operations did not, in this extraordinary instance, signify absolute demise. In concealed corners and unforeseen havens, the indomitable spirit and intellectual legacy of the order tenaciously persisted. A number of Jesuits remarkably continued their vital work in the vast Russian Empire, where the astute Empress Catherine the Great, for her own strategic reasons, steadfastly refused to implement the papal ban. Other devoted members quietly pursued their profound scholarship, diligently keeping alive the rigorous methods and transformative teachings that had once sent ripples through established empires. And crucially, within the minds of those who harbored a deep-seated fear of their influence, the enigmatic narrative of the Black Pope never truly concluded. If anything, the very act of their suppression served only to profoundly deepen the pervasive myth surrounding them. For what construct could possibly be deemed more inherently suspicious than a religious order perceived as possessing such formidable power that even the most absolute monarchs found them intolerable, and so shrouded in secrecy that even the supreme authority of a pope ultimately proved insufficient to contain their elusive influence. Consequently, their enforced exile was widely interpreted not as a definitive defeat, but rather as a chilling confirmation of their enduring, clandestine power, a silent testament that somewhere, in the strategic depths of their enforced quietude, they were patiently biding their time, poised for an eventual, perhaps even more formidable return. Picture the ancient city of Rome during those somber years following the Society of Jesus' suppression. The monumental edifice of the Gesù stood, a weighty presence against the encroaching darkness of night, its massive doors firmly secured, its sacred altars stripped bare of any adornment. The faint, sweet scent of candle smoke lingered there merely as a ghost of memory, a fleeting olfactory trace of what once was. Yet, within that profound hush, one might almost discern the spectral echoes of hushed supplications, the subtle, ethereal rustle of black vestments gliding across cold, unyielding stone floors. This was not the resonant emptiness of true absence, but rather the palpable sensation of something deliberately held captive, a potent force biding its time, poised for an inevitable resurgence. The act of suppression, meticulously orchestrated, was unequivocally intended to bring a definitive end to the Jesuit narrative. Instead, it metamorphosed into a protracted interlude, a silence far more disquieting and profound than any utterance. And it was within this very silence that the enigmatic legend of the Black Pope not only persisted, but flourished, as if his very invisibility served as irrefutable evidence of his clandestine machinations. This profound quietude endured for nearly half a century, stretching its tendrils across the continent. However, mere silence is never synonymous with utter cessation or final demise. In the hushed, veiled corners of Europe, faint murmurs began to circulate, speaking of Jesuits still actively engaged in their work. Notably, within the expansive dominion of Russia, the formidable Empress Catherine the Great had, with calculated nonchalance, disregarded the papal decree that sought to utterly dismantle the order. She held in high esteem their rigorous educational institutions, their unwavering discipline, and their remarkable capacity to enlighten and instruct her populace. Consequently, within the vast expanse of her imperial territories, the Society of Jesus managed to persevere, much like a steadfast flame meticulously shielded against a tempestuous gale. Their esteemed colleges remained operational. Their dedicated priests continued their ministry in discreet fashion, and their intricate networks, which, though hidden, steadfastly endured. Thus, when Pope Pius VII eventually pronounced the order's restoration in the pivotal year of 1814, it was perceived less as a genuine rebirth from nothingness and more as a dramatic, long-awaited unveiling of an entity that had never truly ceased to exist. Across the eternal city of Rome, the deep, sonorous peal of bells resounded through the air as the momentous papal bull was publicly declaimed. The Jesuits, who had once been ignominiously banished, then widely dispersed, and finally subjected to an enforced silence, were now granted the express permission to reassert themselves. And reassert they did, with an astonishing swiftness that caught many by surprise. They swiftly reclaimed their academic institutions, occupying venerable seats of knowledge that had regrettably remained dormant and unwarmed for numerous decades. Furthermore, they energetically re-established their global missions, dispatching priests once more across vast oceanic expanses, back to the ancient lands of China, to the burgeoning territories of the Americas, and to the diverse continent of Africa, carrying with them an indomitable resilience forged and honed during their years of enforced exile. Yet what rendered their return even more profoundly striking was not merely their sheer tenacity and persistence. It was, rather, the remarkable manner in which they re-emerged with augmented strength, as if the very crucible of their suppression had, in an alchemical process, refined and hardened them into unyielding steel. To the general populace, they presented themselves as diligent educators, compelling preachers, and compassionate confessors. But for those discerning observers who scrutinized events with meticulous care, their sudden and vigorous reappearance intimated a reality far more profound and intricate. How could a religious order, so thoroughly dismantled, explicitly outlawed by powerful monarchs, and formally dissolved by a reigning pontiff, resurface with such an astonishing surge of vitality? What clandestine organizational frameworks had permitted them to weather such an existential storm and ultimately endure? Some voices, hushed and conspiratorial, whispered of vast repositories of gold, safeguarded across centuries, of intricate secret networks meticulously maintained in utter silence, and of unwavering allegiances cemented through solemn, unspoken vows. Others steadfastly believed that the legendary Black Pope had, in fact, never relinquished his authority, asserting that throughout the long years of suppression, his directives had flowed through unseen conduits, much like an underground river, silently nourishing unseen roots and ensuring the order's vitality. By the dawn of the 19th century, the Jesuits had once again firmly re-established themselves at the very epicenter of Catholic life. They served as trusted counselors to popes, and they meticulously educated successive generations of brilliant scholars. Their schools blossomed with renewed vigor, extending their influence from the intellectual salons of Paris to the burgeoning metropolis of New York, from the vibrant streets of Buenos Aires to the bustling city of Kolkata. They were no longer perceived as a mere vestige of a bygone era, but rather as an order dynamically reborn and seamlessly integrated into the fabric of modernity. And with each successful stride they took, the mystique surrounding the legend of the Black Pope intensified. His period of enforced silence had, paradoxically, become irrefutable proof of his enduring existence. His triumphant return, in turn, served as undeniable evidence of his formidable power. In the heart of Rome, the General Curia of the Society of Jesus once again ascended to its rightful place as the pulsating nerve center of the global order. Behind its imposing doors, men clad in somber black robes convened in discreet, quiet chambers, meticulously crafting strategies not solely for their evangelistic missions, but also for subtly asserting their influence within the very hallowed halls of the Vatican itself. To the external world, the White Pope stood as the visible public embodiment of Catholic authority. However, for those keen observers who delved beneath the surface, the Black Pope was the unwavering, steady hand, subtly concealed yet ever present, guiding the destiny of the Church from a position of profound, hidden influence. The Restoration was never simply about a mere return to a former state. It was, at its very core, a testament to survival, a powerful demonstration that even when the combined might of monarchs and popes sought to obliterate them, the Jesuits proved themselves fundamentally indissoluble. Their remarkable resurrection in 1814 imparted a profound lesson, one that resonated and was whispered across the centuries. Silence can indeed be endured, exile can be resolutely weathered, and from the crucible of suppression, power can be meticulously reborn, emerging even more subtle, more astonishingly resilient, and more profoundly hidden than it had ever been before. In the deep stillness of the night, one might vividly conjure this image: a solitary candle rekindled within a darkened chapel, black-robed figures silently reassembling, and the distinct, imposing shadow of a general seated purposefully in his chair. The Black Pope, physically absent yet spiritually omnipresent, restored to his station as though he had never, for a single moment, departed. The 19th century unfolded as an epoch defined by the clash of kings and the fervor of revolutions, a tumultuous period witnessing the dramatic overthrow of crowns and the fiery rebirth of empires. Yet, amidst the deafening roar of marching armies and the impassioned cries of nascent nations, another, more subtle presence quietly persisted. It was a presence largely unseen, yet its influence was a pervasive whisper in the gilded chambers of every throne room across the continent. Jesuit confessors, their somber black robes draped like elongated shadows across the opulent, gold-leafed chambers, stood discreetly beside reigning monarchs. They spoke with a measured softness, not as overt rulers wielding temporal power, but as sagacious guides, carefully implanting counsel into the receptive ears of emperors and queens, as the gentle flicker of candlelight danced across highly polished marble floors. In the grand capitals of Paris, Vienna, Madrid, and myriad other European centers, the Jesuits made their strategic return to royal courts, where, a mere century prior, they had been met with profound apprehension and even outright fear. Ironically, the very monarchs who had harbored deep distrust for them in an earlier era now actively sought their astute guidance. In the turbulent aftermath of widespread revolutions, rulers across Europe desperately yearned for a return to stability, for a divine imprimatur to legitimize their rule, and for the comforting whisper of order in a chaotic world. Jesuit advisors, masterfully providing precisely this, cloaked their counsel in the revered language of faith, yet imbued it with the quiet, incisive precision of strategic calculation. However, it was not solely kings who gravitated towards their influence. Astute politicians, seasoned generals, and even rival members of the clergy felt the pervasive, long-reaching tendrils of Jesuit influence. Their educational institutions, meticulously rebuilt and reinvigorated with fervent energy, nurtured and produced generations of future leaders, rigorously trained in the arts of rhetoric, profound philosophy, and intricate legal principles. Whether a prime minister in one nation or a revolutionary leader in another, a significant number bore the indelible imprint of Jesuit teaching, a fact they might or might not openly acknowledge. It was as if the society had subtly laid invisible hands upon the delicate levers of national governance, not seizing outright control, but rather meticulously adjusting, gently nudging, and expertly steering the course of nations with an almost immeasurable patience and precise calculation. Some vocal critics openly accused the Jesuits of surreptitiously manipulating events too vast and complex to definitively trace. When widespread revolutions erupted, when mighty kings were toppled from their thrones, when novel constitutions were painstakingly drafted and adopted, rumors inevitably swirled. Was this merely the capricious hand of coincidence? Or had the shadowy agents of the Black Pope moved unseen, orchestrating their designs amidst the profound upheaval? The cataclysmic French Revolution had, in its initial fury, effectively silenced them. Yet, paradoxically, its far-reaching aftershocks seemed to inadvertently broaden and deepen their sphere of influence. In Spain, in Portugal, and within Italy itself, governments rose and fell in relentless cycles of political turmoil, and always, in the silent background, a Jesuit was frequently rumored to be present, subtly advising, gently correcting, and deftly directing through the potent power of whispers rather than overt commands. The legend of their hidden power intensified notably in 1870, a pivotal year when the Papal States were irrevocably lost, and Rome itself fell under the dominion of a newly unified kingdom. The earthly temporal power of the White Pope demonstrably diminished. Yet strangely, the Jesuits did not wane in strength alongside him. Instead, with remarkable acumen, they adapted their strategies. Their true strength resided not in the might of standing armies, nor in the inviolability of national borders, but rather in the cultivation of discerning minds and unswerving loyalties, intricately bound by invisible spiritual threads. Where other nations perceived only collapse and ruin, the Jesuits, with their unique foresight, discerned new and promising pathways. Where royal crowns crumbled into dust, they offered a compelling sense of stability, and this very stability granted them invaluable access to the echelons of power. Thus, in every opulent palace and every august parliament, there seemed to linger a subtle shadow, a priest meticulously trained in Jesuit schools, a diplomat quietly rumored to possess deep connections to the Curia, a general whose strategic thinking bore the undeniable hallmark of their rigorous education. The elusive Black Pope required no earthly throne of his own. He possessed something far greater: the uncanny ability to subtly bend thrones themselves, not through brute force, but through an influence so exquisitely subtle that no monarch could ever be entirely certain where their own sovereign decisions concluded and another's intricate design imperceptibly began. To the ordinary devout faithful, they were earnest missionaries and dedicated teachers. But to the powerful monarchs and influential ministers, they were the silent, knowing presence in the room, the custodians of every promise whispered in the sanctity of confession, the discreet keepers of every weakness confided in deepest secrecy, holding firmly in their hands the delicate, intricate strings of conscience itself. in such profound silence. Their power radiated and spread further than the most extensive march of any army. And so, the 19th century evolved to become not merely an age of nations asserting their might, but fundamentally an age of whispers, an age where the Black Pope's pervasive shadow extended its reach into every throne room, every parliament, every council chamber, and where, beneath the soft flicker of candlelight, kings were left to ponder, with a lingering unease, whether their most crucial decisions were truly, unequivocally, their own. When the venerable College of Cardinals convenes beneath the awe-inspiring frescoed vaults of the Sistine Chapel, the collective gaze of the world invariably turns to the column of smoke that will eventually ascend, whether black, signifying rejection, or white, heralding a coronation. Yet, for countless centuries, beneath the solemn grandeur of the elaborate rituals and ancient chants, persistent whispers have circulated, speaking of another, unseen hand at work, one that never manifests physically upon the ballot, but whose profound influence is undeniably felt in every single vote cast. The Jesuits, despite being traditionally prohibited from ascending to the papacy until very recent times, were never truly absent from these sacred conclaves. They did not participate as electors, casting their own votes, but rather served in crucial, subtle capacities as trusted confessors, as sagacious spiritual advisors, as the quiet, influential voices positioned discreetly behind the scarlet-robed cardinals. Some among them entered the conclave not as direct voters, but as vigilant guardians of conscience, subtly shaping the profound inner silence and spiritual disposition of men on the precipice of casting their momentous lot. And so, the persistent rumor endured that the Black Pope, though physically seated far removed from the hallowed confines of the Sistine Chapel, wielded as much, if not more, sway than those venerable figures gathered within its walls. This was not a form of crude, overt control, but rather something far more refined and sophisticated. Jesuit scholars, renowned masters of rhetoric and astute discernment, were reputedly instrumental in meticulously shaping crucial alliances long before the heavy conclave doors were ceremoniously locked. They possessed an intimate understanding of the deep-seated ambitions of certain cardinals, the subtle fears that plagued others, and the whispered promises exchanged in the hushed corridors where the thick marble seemed to absorb all sound. And when the ballots were eventually burned, releasing their symbolic smoke, it was frequently suspected that a Jesuit-trained hand had long before already subtly tipped the delicate balance of power. The election of Pius IX in the mid-19th century particularly ignited such speculation, for his pontificate would prove to be one of both immense duration and profound, widespread upheaval. Was his elevation to the chair of Peter merely the benign hand of divine providence, or was it, as many suspected, the careful, strategic counsel of influential Jesuit voices that precisely placed him upon the apostolic throne? His subsequent declaration of papal infallibility was a remarkably bold and, at the time, deeply divisive pronouncement. Yet the Jesuits fiercely defended it, meticulously weaving intricate theological arguments that solidified the controversial decree into an unshakable doctrine. In this crucial moment, the Black Pope's shadowy influence seemed to stretch even into the very definition of papal power itself. Then, as the tumultuous 20th century unfolded, a period when global conflicts dramatically reshaped geopolitical landscapes and brought ancient empires to their knees, the hushed insinuations resurfaced with renewed vigor. Whispers circulated, suggesting that the Society of Jesus exerted a profound, though unseen, influence over Pope Benedict XV's earnest endeavors to broker peace during the cataclysmic events of the First World War. Later, attention turned to the controversial election of Pius XII, a pontiff whose actions or inactions throughout the Second World War remain an intricate and hotly debated historical narrative, shrouded in unresolved questions concerning clandestine diplomatic overtures and covert negotiations. Indeed, it often seemed that behind nearly every significant papal decision, a subtle yet persistent Jesuit influence could be discerned, at times merely a faint echo, at others an undeniably potent force shaping the course of the Church. However, the most profound astonishment, a moment that truly defied all historical precedents, arrived in 2013 when the papal conclave concluded its deliberations. For the very first time in the annals of the papacy, a member of the Society of Jesus was elevated to the highest office. Jorge Mario Bergoglio, choosing the venerable name Francis, appeared on the iconic balcony not solely as the newly elected Bishop of Rome, but, astonishingly, as the inaugural Jesuit pontiff. For some observers, this extraordinary event represented the culmination of many centuries of quiet, strategic influence, a moment when a Jesuit finally donned the revered white cassock, symbolizing the ultimate triumph of their order. To others, it signified the definitive dismantling of an ancient, unofficial barrier, offering compelling evidence that the traditional demarcation between the enigmatic Black Pope and the visible White Pope had, in fact, become more permeable than ever before imagined. Yet, even in the wake of such a monumental shift, within the hushed, hallowed confines of Vatican City, another profound query began to circulate in low tones. If a Jesuit could now rightfully wear the pristine white robes of the papacy, what then became of the man who traditionally bore the symbolic black? Had the authority and stature of the superior general, the so-called Black Pope, somehow been diminished by this unprecedented election? Or conversely, had his formidable reach only expanded, now unified in a mysterious, almost mystical duality with the Holy Father himself? Such speculative enigmas, akin to philosophical musings at the close of a long day, persisted, hinting that conclaves might involve far more than mere ballots and the puff of smoke. They suggested that amidst the solemnity of prayers and the subtle rustle of ecclesiastical vestments, there might reside faint echoes of pivotal decisions, perhaps even preordained outcomes, shaped long before the doors to the Sistine Chapel were ceremoniously sealed. And so, the enduring myth persists. The belief that while the cardinals within the conclave exercise their sacred duty of selection, another unseen presence subtly guides their deliberations. This guidance, it is said, does not manifest through direct intervention or explicit decree, but rather through the invisible compass of unwavering loyalty, absolute obedience, and rigorous intellectual and spiritual formation. The indelible mark of Jesuit discipline, a force so profound that even the resplendent scarlet robes of the cardinals cannot entirely obscure its influence. The White Pope ascends to his sacred office, and the magnificent bells of St. Peter's Basilica peal forth, announcing his election to the waiting world. Yet, in the profound silence that inevitably follows the receding roar of the jubilant crowd, the enigmatic shadow of the Black Pope endures. It is almost as if the conclave itself facilitates two distinct coronations, one performed in the full glare of public acclamation, and another, far more clandestine, unfolding in profound secrecy. As it has for 2 millennia, night descends gently over Rome, enveloping the ancient city in its accustomed, tranquil veil of silence. The venerable stones of the Vatican complex gradually cool in the crisp evening air, while the expansive piazza, only hours prior bustling with devoted pilgrims, now stands largely empty, its vast expanse devoid of those who had eagerly lifted their gazes towards the majestic dome of the basilica. Nevertheless, as the last flickering torches are extinguished and the echoes of ancient chants dissipate into the realm of memory, a distinctly different kind of quiet takes hold. It is not merely the peaceful hush of sleep, but rather a palpable stillness pregnant with vigilance, always watching. For the narrative surrounding the Black Pope is not confined to the outcomes of conclaves or the pronouncements of councils, nor does it conclude with wars valiantly survived or revolutions stoically endured. Its intricate threads extend continuously through the labyrinthine corridors of contemporary power, where the complex domains of politics, global finance, and spiritual faith interweave to form a tapestry of influence so intricate that few can ever truly perceive its full scope. The superior general of the Jesuits, in this modern era, no longer dons the protective armor of a warrior, nor does he dispatch fleets of ships across vast oceans to distant lands. Yet, his influence remains truly boundless, channeled through a vast network of esteemed schools, renowned universities, far-flung missions, and most potently, through the unwavering allegiance of men whose loyalty transcends even the deepest bonds of blood. While some dismiss these persistent claims as mere conspiracy theories, and others categorize them as enduring myths, it is undeniable that in hushed whispers, the Jesuits are consistently characterized as the Church's most discreet diplomats, its most meticulously disciplined strategists, and its most formidable and unyielding defenders. Indeed, a mind honed by Jesuit training can be encountered not only within the solemn precincts of seminaries, but also in the hallowed halls of parliaments, in the discreet chambers of embassies, and within the towering edifices of academia and high finance. And wherever these individuals operate, the subtle, pervasive shadow of their leader is believed to follow, whether consciously perceived or entirely unseen, whether explicitly acknowledged or remaining utterly unnamed. The Vatican itself undergoes periodic shifts and reforms, and popes, in their temporal roles, rise and fall. Yet the perceived presence of the Black Pope appears to be eternal, as though the very role itself has transmuted into a kind of spectral entity, never publicly crowned, never overtly visible, yet perpetually there, an unyielding constant. When the White Pope makes his grand appearances on balconies, bathed in the adulation and applause of the faithful, the Black Pope is said to remain within the quiet confines of his private residence, not shrouded in shadow due to any inherent weakness, but rather by deliberate, strategic design. His formidable power, it is understood, has never been intended for public spectacle. In the intricate fabric of the modern world, whenever global crises erupt, be it devastating wars, widespread scandals, or the dramatic collapse of national economies, there are always those who steadfastly maintain that the guiding hand of the Jesuits can still be discerned. They assert that beyond the eloquent speeches and official decrees, another voice perpetually lingers, calm, meticulously deliberate, profoundly strategic, and utterly unseen. Whether these profound assertions represent an undeniable truth or merely an elaborate fable, no one can state with absolute certainty. Nevertheless, the belief itself carries an immense weight, and with each circulating rumor, the potent legend surrounding the Black Pope grows incrementally stronger, weaving itself deeper into the collective consciousness. And so, as the centuries relentlessly turn, the powerful image endures, the Black Pope as both a mirror and a complex counterpart, a profound shadow to the illuminating light of Peter's successor, not a direct rival nor an overt enemy, but something far more intricate and nuanced, a vigilant guardian, a sagacious counselor, a master strategist, and occasionally, in the minds of the apprehensive, a subtle puppet master. The precise truth of this dynamic remains intricately tangled, perpetually elusive, and perhaps purposefully concealed within the deep, convoluted folds of history. Now, in the gentle softness of the deepening night, let this final, haunting thought gently drift across the mind, delicate as wisps of candle smoke. What if, throughout the long, storied history of Rome, there have always been two distinct thrones? One crafted from resplendent marble, gilded and ceremoniously crowned for all the world to behold, and another, an ethereal throne of shadow, where a man cloaked in black subtly guides the church, not through overt decree, but through the profound command of hearts and minds. The world sleeps, the ancient city sleeps, but the shadow, it is whispered, never does. And so, the ultimate question lingers, soft and persistent as a whisper at the very edge of dreams. If the White Pope carries the sacred keys of heaven, what then does the mysterious Black Pope carry?